Chapter 474. The Commander-in-Chief's words were majestic and powerful and resonant. However, no one in the Western troop dared to doubt the words spoken by this man who was widely acknowledged as the most boorish, unreasonable, adept at scolding and cursing people's ancestors. He could really do what he said. He would definitely do what he said when he said he would erect a tombstone in front of anyone's house if they were a coward. He would do exactly the same when the time came. There would be no room for negotiation. The elites of the Western Legion roared as they charged out. There was a voice in everyone's heart that answered, "We can't be cowards even if we're beaten to death." If a tombstone of shame were to be erected in front of their house, **ck, how could their families face the world in the future? Moreover, Wang Yunju's last sentence ignited the blood of all the soldiers in the Western Army. Fu Baogua is Yutong's top young general, this is publicly acknowledged. Your father is convinced, but the Eastern troop has always been called Yutong's top troop. Your father is not convinced. Remember to snatch this title back for your father when I send you over. Your father has lost once, my subordinates must not lose again. Snatch it back. We must snatch it back. 150,000 men roared in unison, causing the ground to tremble. The leader of the reinforcement troops was the vanguard of the Western Army, Sun Zihu, the most valiant general under Wang Yunju. Before leaving, Marshal Wang called Sun Zihu aside and said solemnly, "Sun Zihu, you must remember, Marshal, can you call me by my full name? You can even call me Huzi. Don't you find it awkward to call me grandson with such a serious expression?" Sun Zihu looked at his commander with extreme displeasure. His face was full of whiskers. **ck, scram. Scram, scram. Your father wanted to give you a few more reminders, but I'm not in the mood now. I won't say anything to you. Wang Yunju kicked his trusted subordinate away. Sun Zihu scrambled to his feet and left. Following which, the army set off and left quickly. Seeing that the army was getting further and further away, Wang Yunju slapped the big tree beside him in annoyance. I wanted to tell him to bring back as many brothers alive as possible. I was already so serious, but that bastard is so insensitive. If he really dares to kill too many of our brothers, I'll really turn his grandson into a grandson. The generals at the side rolled their eyes at him. Insensitive? Marshal, you've been calling him grandson for 8 years. Who can understand such amorous feelings? Your solemn, formal, and serious attitude is really too formal, too serious, too serious, too serious, too serious. The reason why Sun Zihu didn't argue with you on the spot like he usually is probably because you're being so formal and serious. Sun Zihu is really giving you face, however, they only cursed in their hearts and didn't say it out loud. After all, everyone knew the marshal's true thoughts. When the army was far away and could no longer be seen, the vulgar and abnormally boorish Grand Marshal stood on that high spot for a long time, gazing into the distance for a long time. It was as if he could still see the long-gone figures of the reinforcements from the Western Front, but also as if he was looking forward to the safe return of his soldiers. His lonely figure, with his hands behind his back, kept gazing into the distance. He didn't move a single step until the sky turned dark. No one dared to look at the marshal's face. All the generals silently went back by themselves. That night, the Western camp was silent. It was said that the marshal was drunk, which was rare for him. He was dead drunk. Sun Zihu had been traveling at lightning speed all along the way. Especially when he left, he tried his best to control himself and not look back. He had followed the marshal for 11 years. After spending 11 years together, he knew the marshal's temperament like the back of his hand. At the last moment, how could Sun Zihu not know what the marshal wanted to say? However, he didn't let the marshal say it. Because if the marshal said it, he was afraid that he would cry uncontrollably. He was a man, yet a 7-foot-tall man was crying. It was too embarrassing. However, going to the Eastern Front this time, to participate in the most tragic battle of his life. How many of his 150,000 brothers would come back alive? No one could guarantee this. Even Sun Zihu himself didn't have the confidence to come back alive. Marshal, if I, Sun Zihu, can come back alive, I will still be your vanguard. At that time, even if you still call me grandson. I. Damn it, can you not call me grandson anymore? Sun Zihu wiped away the tears in his eyes and replied to himself on behalf of the marshal in his heart, damn it. If I don't call you grandson, how can I call you grandfather? So what if I call you grandson? I want to call you grandson for the rest of my life, grandson, grandson. Damn it. The marshal is so rude. I can't change it in this lifetime. Sun Zihu scolded jokingly, laughing with tears in his eyes. The deputy general beside him was also a tall and strong fellow. He asked in disbelief, General, are you crying? Sun Zihu was enraged when he heard that. His face flushed and his hair stood on end as he roared with all his might, damn it. You're the one crying. You're the one who's crying. Do you have eyes for pissing? When did I cry? You bastard. Men, record this general's military order. Wang Daxiong has belittled his superior. Next month's pay will be deducted. Wang Daxiong was speechless. MMP. He was clearly crying and yet he didn't allow anyone to say anything. Deducting pay at the drop of a hat. Don't you know any other tricks? My pay for the past 3 years has already been confiscated by you. If it weren't for the fact that you took the money and gave your pay to the families of the martyrs, I would have already chopped you up with my sword. The army marched day and night without stopping. By the time Sun Zihu led the western reinforcements to the Fortress of Resilience, they had arrived a day and a half ahead of schedule. All the elites of the Western Army were steaming hot in this cold weather. However, this had become the norm for the Western reinforcements. Everyone's cotton clothes had been drenched in sweat at least 30 to 40 times along the way. They had to continue wearing them even when they were drenched, drying themselves with their own body temperature. They dared not take them off no matter how uncomfortable they were. Once they were taken off to dry, the cotton clothes would immediately turn into hard metal in the cold weather. By then, they would truly have nothing to wear. However, Sun Zihu's eyes widened the moment he saw the situation in front of the Fortress of Resilience. When he rushed over, it was just when the offensive and defensive sides had just finished a battle. The ground in front of the Fortress of Resilience was dyed crimson. The Fortress of Resilience was a pass that would be reinforced by generations of defending generals, but it was already filled with signs of destruction. Everything else aside, just the marks on the tens of thousands of caddies of rocks that had been used to forge the walls sent chills down Sun Zihu's spine. What kind of attack had they endured to leave such marks? As far as the eye could see, the rock that was rumored to be indestructible was covered in cracks, and some of the outer layers of the rock had already been ripped off. Sun Zihu, who had been through hundreds of battles, knew what kind of situation this would happen. Only when the attacking soldiers had already rushed up the walls but had yet to step in would such a situation occur. In other words, someone had already climbed up to the top of the wall in the battle just now, grabbing onto it with both hands. He only needed to flip over and he would be able to enter. However, he was suddenly pushed back down at that very moment. The soldier who fell from the top of the city wall, following the strongest survival instinct of human nature, made him grab randomly in that instant, hoping to grab anything that could support him and stabilize his body. Only in that kind of situation would he be able to dig out that kind of stone fragment from the outside of the city wall. The entire outer wall of the Fortress of Resilience was in such a state. How many times of intense seesaw attacks and defenses had they gone through to achieve such a state? The more he thought about it, the more intimidated he became. It was truly frightening and soul-stirring. At that moment, Dongxuan's troops outside the fortress were cleaning up the corpses of their fallen soldiers. Upon closer inspection, Sun Zihu felt a chill run down his spine, his muscles tightening. Looking from afar, many of Dongxuan's soldiers' corpses could no longer be carried on stretchers. There were simply too many dead, there were simply not enough stretchers to carry them. Dongxuan's troops had used carriages to load the carriages, laying down long and wide wooden planks. The corpses of the fallen soldiers were tossed onto the carriages like broken sacks. A wooden carriage could probably hold dozens of corpses. If they were piled higher, there would be a few more. This was only the surface of the corpses strewn all over the ground. After moving one corpse, there were still many more below. Another layer was moved, and another layer was moved. It was only when the ground was dyed red that the process of cleaning up the corpses came to an end. In spite of this, the blood that flowed on the ground was even more ghastly. The elites of the Western troop sucked in a cold breath, their hearts chilled. Tragic. Chapter 475. Such a brutal battle had never happened in the Western troops' many years of war. After all, the enemies they faced were different. Dongxian and Zio's armies were fundamentally different. The empire of Zio's army's individual combat ability was second to none in this world, but they had never gained the upper hand against Yutong's army that excelled in teamwork. Yutong's Western troop, who had always gained the upper hand against Zio's army, had always felt that their combat power was the best in Yutong. Previously, Marshal Wang of the Western troop had given the order for the Western reinforcements to snatch Yutong's top troop, but now, witnessing the Eastern battle with their own eyes, the Western elites felt their hearts skip a beat. Tens of thousands of corpses had been lost in a single battle. Sun Zihu entered the Fortress of Resilience in a daze, but he was immediately warmly welcomed by the defending generals. Fu Baogua had even come out personally to receive him and treat him with the highest of honors. Holding Sun Zihu's hand, Fu Baogua's eyes were brimming with tears. The Fortress of Resilience was in dire need of reinforcements right now. Perhaps it should be said that the Fortress of Resilience had always needed reinforcements, but the need for reinforcements was already pressing. Without reinforcements, the Fortress of Resilience could no longer be defended. It was in a precarious situation and could easily be destroyed. Faced with Han Sanha's ferocious attack, Fu Baogua's 400,000 men were decreasing at a speed that pained him to the core. There were less than 250,000 men who could fight now. These 250,000 men included the steel cavalry who could not participate in the defense of the fortress and the 30,000 men that belonged to Fu Baogua's secret troop. In other words, there were only 80,000 men left to participate in the daily defense of the fortress. Almost every single one of these 80,000 people was exhausted and exhausted. They were barely holding on and could collapse at any moment. Fu Baogua's face was pale, his eyes sunken, and he was almost out of shape. He, who had always paid attention to his appearance, now looked like a middle-aged uncle with stubble all over his face. In spite of this, the concealed killing intent still proved that Fu Baogua was still holding on, still abiding by the promise he had made to Yunyang that day. Marshal Fu, you've worked hard. Sun Zihu has led 150,000 brothers from the Western Army to participate in the battle. The reinforcements from the Western Front will all listen to Marshal Fu's commands. Orders will be strictly executed, and there will be no objections. To be able to become an elite in the army, they were basically veterans. With just a glance at the battlefield, Sun Zihu and the 150,000 Western troops had a good understanding of the current situation. They were even more impressed by the Eastern troops. The top troop of Yutong lived up to its reputation. It lived up to its reputation. Marshal, your wish of us taking back Yutong's top troop is really slim. At least, we don't have much confidence in it. Battles were always two-sided. To be able to beat the enemy so miserably, the price they had to pay couldn't be any better. Brothers, you've worked hard. Fu Baogua smiled warmly and happily. Brothers, it's been a long and arduous journey. Just looking at your attire is enough to tell you that. I'll have a good meal tonight and then I'll sleep. There's no need to worry about the war. Let's talk about it after we recover. We'll need to rely on you guys in the future, but not now. Yes. Sun Zihu was also a man who knew how to fight. Naturally, he knew that Fu Baogua's words were sincere and that he was truly thinking for the Western troop. He had led 150,000 brothers to rush all the way. Although they had arrived a day and a half earlier and their morale was high, their stamina was already at its limit. Everyone was exhausted. If they were to join the battle now, they would only be slaughtered. They weren't here to help, but to throw their lives away. A night of rest was indeed necessary. It was absolutely necessary. The reinforcements who had traveled such a long way, in addition to familiarizing themselves with the war, the terrain, and the situation, would need at least 2 days of rest before they could fully recover and assimilate. However, both Sun Zihu and Fu Baoguo knew that Han Sanhe would never give them this buffer time. Indeed, on the same night that the reinforcements arrived, Dongxuan's army launched another attack on the Fortress of Resilience under Han Sanhe's command. It was an unprecedentedly powerful attack. The 300,000 soldiers of Dongxian were divided into 6 waves by Han Sanhe, who attacked relentlessly without any break in between. The sounds of battle shook the heavens. Fu Baoguo tried his best to divide the defending troops into 3 waves, taking turns to go forward. Many of the soldiers were truly exhausted. They carried the rocks and walked, but when they suddenly fell to the ground, they did not faint from exhaustion, they died from exhaustion. Fu Baoguo's expression was steely, his heart was steely as well. He knew that he had to get through this. If he could not, the Fortress of Resilience would fall without a doubt. On the other hand, with the aid of the Western reinforcements, he could continue fighting Han Sanhe. Marshal, deploy the steel cavalry and the serving troop to help defend the fort. Many of the steel cavalry generals and Fu Baoguo's secret troop came forward to plead, tears streaming down their faces. We can't go on like this. The brothers who defend the fort are dying of exhaustion. Fu Baoguo's expression was like a rock. No. It's your time to rest now. Go back to sleep. We can still hold on here. We don't need your help. The faces of the generals of the 2 elite troops were practically drenched in tears. The brothers can't take it anymore. They're watching their comrades die in battle, die from exhaustion, and they can't hold on any longer, but we're eating and sleeping every day, doing nothing, the brothers are going crazy. Fu Baoguo said coldly, going crazy? No, we're not really crazy. Then you must continue to hold on. The day will come when it's your turn. Don't blame me for not reminding you when you're unlucky if you can't sleep or rest now. Now, I order you to scram. Even if you're really crazy, there's still a place for you to go crazy. Scram. The generals left with their heads hung low. It was not that Fu Baoguo was steel-hearted and did not want to deploy the steel cavalry and the secret troop to defend the fort, but he could not. The Fortress of Resilience had to be defended. However, Fu Baoguo already had a plan in mind against Han Sanhe's attack. The Fortress of Resilience might not be able to hold on for much longer. Even if they managed to get through this, the amount of time they could hold on would still be limited with the help of the Western reinforcements. Once the Fortress of Resilience was breached, the 30,000 secret troop and 150,000 steel cavalry would be the foundation for Fu Baoguo to build another Fortress of Resilience. If they were to be expended defending the fort now, it would be the greatest waste. The greatest strength that a cavalry could unleash would always be on horseback. It was never defending the fort. Sun Zihu led his army and settled down in the empty barracks in the fort. These barracks were initially filled with men, but now, they were empty, with barely a soul to be seen. Looking at the clean and tidy military camp that was empty, the small tables and chairs in the tents, as well as the handwriting left behind by the officers and soldiers, the 150,000 elite soldiers of the Western Army cried like children. On the 3rd day of the 12th lunar month, arrive at the Fortress of Resilience. Fight for the country. 10 comrades will discuss their funeral arrangements. Their wills and the soldiers' provisions will be settled today. However, the brothers don't think that they'll die, so we laughed all night. On the 6th of the 12th month, the battle started today. We didn't go out to battle. In the afternoon, we saw many of our comrades' corpses being carried back and burned. The brothers were silent, the entire barracks so quiet you could hear a pin drop. On the 7th of the 12th month, we went out to battle. 3 of our brothers died in battle. When we returned to this tent, there were only 7 of us left. We cried our hearts out. On the 9th of the 12th month, we fought. 2 of our brothers died in battle. The remaining 5 cried their hearts out again, mourning our fallen brothers. On the 11th of the 12th month, only Sun Dabiao and I came back. This time, there were no more tears. It wasn't that we wanted to cry but had no tears. Both of us placed our brothers' memorial tablets properly and bought wine with silver coins, getting drunk all night. We told our brothers not to go too far and to wait for us. We'll be back with the troops soon. On the 13th of the 12th month, Sun Dabiao died in battle. There was a small notebook in Sun Zihu's tent that only recorded the 13th of the 12th month. There was nothing else after that. The writer must have died for the country in the battle that followed. This should be something recorded by a military secretary. The team of 10 arrived here on the 3rd of the 12th month, and all of them died in battle. All in all, it only took 10 days. There were also 6 days when it wasn't their turn to battle. At the back of the small notebook, there were many pages torn off. It should be the wills that the soldiers used to write. The last page was the one that said, Sun Dabiao died in battle. There were a few words on the back. The handwriting was messy, as if it was erased after being written. Sun Zihu tried his best to distinguish it. When he finally made it out, he suddenly burst into tears. There were 4 words. I want to go home. Chapter 476. The war cries that lasted the entire night shook the heaven and earth. Sun Zihu and the Western elites who had just arrived were not in the mood to sleep in such an environment, so it was only natural that they found it harder to do so now. In spite of this, Sun Zihu had issued a death order: sleep. Whoever can't sleep tonight will be punished as defying a military order. Also, the list of offenders will be reported to Marshal Wang. Marshal Wang will decide how to judge them. The order was extremely unreasonable, but it was the most appropriate one at the moment. To Sun Zihu, the reinforcements from the Western Front were the only time he and his brothers had to rest for the night. After this night, it would be blood and fire, life and death. Why had Han Sanha launched such a ferocious attack at this time? One of the reasons was to prevent them from getting a good rest. If the 150,000 troops who had just arrived did not rest well, the damage to their overall combat power would be significant. The most direct result would be that Han Sanha's Dongxian army would lose at least tens of thousands of men. It could even have a great impact on the entire battle. What are Sun Zihu and the rest doing? Fu Baogua, who was so tired that he was barely human, asked with bloodshot eyes after midnight. Snoring, thunderous snoring, answered a general. Well done. Fu Baogua nodded in satisfaction. Western troop elites indeed. The other generals also had looks of admiration on their faces. To be able to sleep in such an environment, they were no ordinary people. They were truly of exceptional quality. It looked like the Western troop elites who had come as reinforcements were not much weaker than the Eastern troop. We know that we should sleep and rest, but we really don't want to sleep, yet we have no choice. Firstly, Sun Xianfeng has given us a death order. Secondly, the threat is upon us. Disobeying a military order is secondary, but the key is that the violator will have to report back to Marshal Wang. If it's true, we'll be blacklisted as cowards. So, we have to sleep even if we're beaten to death. Besides, only a good night's sleep and rest can we better deal with that damned Han Sanha. When we've rested and rested well tomorrow, we'll settle the score with Dongxian. We'll let them know that Yutang's military isn't just limited to the Eastern troop, but the Western troop as well. The battle that lasted the entire night finally came to an end at dawn. Fu Baogua had paid a heavy price of 17,000 men in this battle. Dongxuan's army was even worse off. There were no less than 30,000 corpses left under the city, and at least 10,000 of those who were slightly injured managed to drag their lives back. In this offensive and defensive battle, both sides fought with all their might. The steel cavalry, who had been roaming the nearby forest in search of battle opportunities, had moved out more than 20 times that night. In just one night, they had used up all the arrows they had brought with them, leaving not a single one behind. It was only at the break of dawn on the second day that Fu Baogua could finally heave a sigh of relief. But Sun Zihu requested to fight. You're the one who knows the strength of the reinforcements at the Western Front the best, so you'll have full authority to command and assign your troops. Fu Baogua said, I only have one request. Buy us a day and a night of rest. Don't worry, General Fu. The Western troop will do their best. Even if they have to sacrifice their lives and be wiped out, the fortress of resilience will not fall. Sun Zihu returned the salute solemnly. What he had seen along the way during the long journey had made Sun Zihu truly understand the importance of the fortress of resilience. After the fortress of resilience, it was a vast expanse of flat land. There was no longer any danger to defend. Once this fortress was breached, Yutong would be exposed to the enemy naked, at their mercy. It was no wonder that there were mountains of corpses and seas of blood every time they fought here. It was because this was the only path that the invading enemy had to pass through. If Dongxian wanted to invade Yutong, they would have to breach the fortress of resilience. Only by doing so could they talk about invading Yutong. As for crossing the two mountains on the side, it was not entirely impossible. The only condition was that Dongshuan's soldiers were experts of the fifth peak and above. That was all. Of course, even crossing the two mountains on the side of the Fortress of Resilience was not entirely safe. There were still countless steep cliffs and obstacles along the way. Even a cultivator who had attained the fifth heaven of the peak realm might not be able to cross it safely. This was the lesson that Dongxian had learned through countless bloody battles since Yutong had built the Fortress of Resilience. Although Han Sanhe was the god of war of his generation, his intelligence unparalleled, he could only fight Fu Baogua head-on in front of the Fortress of Resilience. Other than that, there was no other way to bypass the Fortress of Resilience. Sun Zihu had followed Western Marshal Wang Yunzhu for more than a decade. He was a veteran of the battlefield, or else he would not have been entrusted with such a heavy responsibility by Wang Yunzhu to lead this expedition. He was indeed the person who was the most familiar, the most knowledgeable, and the most suitable to lead the Western reinforcements. Sun Zihu accepted the military order solemnly and arranged his troops immediately, splitting the 150,000 men into 5 waves, 30,000 men in each wave, replacing all the soldiers who were currently guarding the fortress. Many of the soldiers closed their eyes and started snoring the moment they were replaced. Some did not even leave their posts. There were even many who fell asleep standing up. Even Fu Baogua himself had shut his eyes immediately after giving his orders and was carried back by the assistant general and janissary beside him. Marshal Fu had been sleeping all along the way. No one knew what he was dreaming about, but the janissary felt that the cotton jacket on his back had been drenched by the marshal's tears. Who would have believed that Yutong's renowned marshal, Fu Baogua, who had always been cold-hearted, would actually cry? Fu Baogua's assistant general and janissary were not surprised, for their eyes were filled with tears as well. The Fortress of Resilience, Yutong's 400,000 brothers at the eastern border, including the martial world's reinforcements and ordinary citizens who had volunteered to join the war, amounted to less than 450,000 men. Up until now, there were only 230,000 men left. In other words, up until now, a total of 180,000 brothers had fallen at the Fortress of Resilience forever. Now, none of the warriors in the Fortress of Resilience dared to gather. Even after the war, when they were at their most tired, those generals who were used to drinking a little to relieve their fatigue and get together with their brothers were now drinking alone and crying as they drank. They dared not greet or call for friends, only wishing to drink alone. It was because the people who used to drink with them could not be gathered no matter how they called for them now. The 8 brothers who used to drink together had suddenly become 3, then 2. How did the 2 of them feel when they were together? It was not drinking, it was digging their hearts out, one by one. That night, every soldier who had been relieved of their duties, after waking up from their deep slumber, immediately burst into loud sobs that were filled with suppressed emotions. Looking at the neatly arranged wills left by their comrades beside them, looking at the money they had left behind to beg for them to bring home for the army, recalling how their brothers had roared and used their chests to block the saber that was slashing at them, blocking the arrows that were aimed at them with their own bodies, recalling how the cunning fellow had taken a big stride in front of them and turned into a porcupine by the countless arrows. He had turned into a porcupine. Turning back, he was still laughing with blood foaming in his mouth. F***ck. I've been cunning all my life, I've been impulsive this time. I've really been impulsive. Then, his comrades who had fallen. Recalling how the brothers had laughed and patted his shoulder when they had gone to war. If I die in battle, you must help me take care of my mother. If I die in battle, I'll entrust my family to you. If I die in battle, my child is still young. Brother, you'll have to work hard. This is the divorce letter. If I die in battle, don't tell my family about my death. Send the divorce letter back first and let that woman go. We'll talk about it later. She's too stubborn. If I were to send the news of my death back now, she would really guard me for the rest of her life. You haven't found a wife yet. Just nice. If I die in battle, you can come to my house. My wife is pretty and gentle. You can marry into my family and help me take care of my child. If you feel uncomfortable, you can change your surname to yours. At that time, my mother will be your mother, my son will be your son, and my wife will be your wife. Thinking of these entrusted tasks, everyone burst into tears. When they had spoken, there had been laughter, there had even been scuffles and curses, but now that they thought of it, it was heart-wrenching. Fu Baoguo woke up in the middle of the night, his eyes staring at the ceiling listlessly. After a while, he suddenly covered his mouth, tears streaming down his cheeks like a flood. Clutching his chest, he felt the excruciating pain as he sobbed. 180,000 brothers, gone just like that. He sucked in deep breaths, the pain in his heart making it hard for him to breathe. It was said that a general's heart should be like iron, but how could a general's heart be like iron? Even if it was like iron, it was not real iron after all, it would still hurt. The agony seeped into his bones. It had only been a day, but Fu Baoguo and the eastern border troops' heart-wrenching agony had been thoroughly tasted by the western troop who had come as reinforcements. The bitterness of it was truly heart-wrenching for every soldier of the western troop. Han Sanha's probing attack alone had caused the western troop to lose more than 2,000 men in a straight line. This was really just Han Sanha's probing attack. His ultimate goal was to find out who the reinforcements from yesterday were. He had to find out who they were before he could devise a targeted strategy. Chapter 477. After the probing attack, Han Sanha could sense the identity of the newcomer at once. The frontline battlefield had been changed, the troops had been changed, and the way they fought was obviously different. Even though they were all elite troops, they each had their own distinguishing features and style. The new relief troops' individual combat ability was even higher than the eastern troops, and their teamwork was excellent as well. Although the western troop had lost more than 2,000 men in this wave of probing attack, Dong Xian had lost more than 5,000 soldiers, almost 2.5 times the loss. Such combat power, such training, they should be Yutong's elites from other directions. The northern troop, Taizheng, was fighting while the southern troop could barely fend for themselves. Naturally, it was the western troop who had come. Among Yutong's military, only the western troop possessed outstanding individual combat ability, due to the fact that they had been fighting against Zio's army, which was known to be the continent's best in terms of individual combat ability. However, there seemed to be only a handful of people in the western troop who possessed such a commanding ability. However, the western line needed Wang Yunzhu to oversee it, so the commander of this war must be Wang Yunzhu's best general, Sun Zihu. The grandson had come. Han Sanha was indeed the top general of the continent. He had swiftly guessed the reinforcement troops' capabilities and even locked onto the identity of the commander. With a single thought, he retreated from the attack immediately. After the time it took to drink half a cup of tea, a large flag was raised. Sun Zihu. Why have you come all the way here to die? What are you waiting for if you don't surrender now? Seeing this, Sun Zihu flew into a rage. Without another word, he shot out an arrow and shot the flag down. In spite of this, he had also confirmed the other party's guess. In the next 3 days, the unusually brutal war escalated rapidly. The Western troops elites who were used to fighting tough battles in the West were gradually overwhelmed by the tactical atmosphere. This was not a war at all. It was a bunch of lunatics playing a game with human lives. It was not that their individual combat ability and teamwork tactics were useless, but they could only be used to a limited extent. Yutong's desire to protect the country and its people, their sense of duty to not be annihilated was one thing. They were not afraid of death. Dongxian, on the other hand, was an invader. How could they be so valiant? They truly deserved the title of the continent's top military power. Even if the enemies were attacking or besieging the city, their movements were neat and tidy, without the slightest hint of disorder. Even in the face of his comrades who were falling from the city wall like raindrops, his expression did not change, and his performance of the 4 words, wave upon wave, was like a textbook. No matter how great the sacrifices in front were, they still charged forward wave after wave, fearlessly charging forward. Sun Zihu looked into the distance and saw that on the other side of the enemy's formation, there was a large row of 500 military law enforcers with cold glints in their hands. If he moved forward, the saber in his hand would fall. There was a slim chance of survival if they advanced, but retreating meant certain death. With this realization, the Dongxian soldiers knew how to choose. Was there not a slim chance of survival? There was still a chance of survival compared to certain death. In spite of this, fighting Dongxian soldiers personally and experiencing Han Sanha's strictness in managing his troops, Sun Zihu felt a chill in his heart. Why was he ranked number 1 on the continent? Why was he the god of war? In this battle, the momentum, power, and intimidation of his battle strategy had been fully displayed. The strict laws, the strict discipline, the elite troops, the overwhelming attacks, coupled with a group of crazy generals and soldiers, the combat power of the army was rising exponentially. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Before this, Marshal Fu Baogua had been facing such a strong opponent, but he had never been at a disadvantage. The fortress of resilience had never fallen. He was indeed the top man of Yutong's younger generation, whom even Marshal Wang admitted he was inferior to. He lived up to his reputation. How many of our brothers have gone? This was the question that Sun Zihu had to ask with a grim expression every day after the battle ended. He did not want to ask, he did not want to hear the answer. Perhaps, he did not dare to. However, he had to ask and he had to hear it now. In spite of this, Sun Zihu's heart trembled each time he heard the casualty figures. The Western troop that he had brought with him was 150,000 elite men from the western border. They had only fought for 4 days and a third of them were gone. 50,000 brothers are gone, just like that. After confirming the number, Sun Zihu's heart was bleeding. General Sun. Fu Baogua walked over solemnly. Marshal Fu. Sun Zihu stood up and saluted. General Sun, this marshal would like to first express my gratitude to you, to the Western Border's reinforcements. It's your hard work, your contributions, and your sacrifices that have earned us 4 days of time. This time has far exceeded this marshal's expectations. Thank you. Fu Baogua was filled with gratitude. I dare not accept it. We're all Yutong's people, we're all soldiers of the military. This is our duty, it's only right and proper. I, Sun Zihu, really can't accept Marshal Fu's thanks. Sun Zihu said. If it had been any other day, Sun Zihu would never have replied like this when he heard Fu Baogua's words. He would have been furious. What did he mean by earning us 4 days of time? What did he mean by this far exceeded his expectations? Who were you looking down on? In spite of this, Sun Zihu, who had truly experienced Han Sanha's power, dared not say anything else. Facing Han Sanha, he would not be timid nor would he give up on the battle, but he could not help but feel a tinge of guilt. Even after each battle, Sun Zihu would feel a little dazed. Had he made it through? Did I survive another attack from the number 1 general of the continent? At this moment, he knew that Fu Baogua's words were sincere. There was no other meaning to it, it was genuine gratitude and admiration, as well as heartfelt admiration. This marshal also knows that your heart is aching. Fu Baogua said calmly, "You're aching for your brothers. I understand how you feel because I'm aching as well. But, this is a battlefield." Sun Zihu said loudly, "Yes. This humble general understands. You don't understand, at least not completely. Do you know that we don't have time to feel heartache now?" Fu Baogua said clearly, "The Empire's survival depends on this battle. Our brothers who are lying on the ground will never be lonely. Because there will be more brothers who will accompany them in batches. Those brothers who are going to accompany them, that includes you, that includes me. Even all the warriors in the Fortress of Resilience, no one is an exception." Fu Baogua's eyes were gleaming. "But, before we go to accompany our brothers, we can't throw away the honor of being Yutong's militants. We have to fulfill our duty and fulfill our duty as Yutong's people. Do you understand?" "Yes." Sun Zihu answered loudly. The gaze he used to look at Fu Baogua now was like he was looking at Marshal Wang Yunzhu, whom he had respected his entire life. It could be discerned from Fu Baogua's words. This Marshal Fu didn't even think about going back alive. He was obviously prepared to bury himself under the Fortress of Resilience. "The Western troops have helped us hold out for 4 days. It's enough." Fu Baogua turned to look at his subordinates. "Now, let the Western brothers rest. Eastern troops, go up." Another 3 days passed. "Marshal, a section of the wall might not be able to hold out any longer." Fu Baogua's vision darkened when he received the news from his personal guard. Had the thing he was most afraid of finally come? The Fortress of Resilience had always been known as the world's strongest fort. The entire wall of the Fortress of Resilience was 10 feet thick. Its main body was made of the toughest mountain rock, with countless steel materials mixed in. After the last battle, Tai Zheng had mobilized the entire army and almost emptied the mountain on the opposite side. The outer layer of the wall on the east side of the Fortress of Resilience was thickened by another 20 feet, and the entire wall was 10 feet taller. This 30 feet thick, majestic wall built entirely of stone was Fu Baogua's greatest confidence in defending the Fortress of Resilience. Now, under the relentless attack of Dongshuan's troop, this world's strongest fort that had been reinforced and repaired far better than it had been in the beginning had finally suffered damage and a gap. There did not need to be many of such gaps. Just one, any one of them, could wipe out the natural defenses of the Fortress of Resilience. It could even mean that the Fortress of Resilience had been breached. Repair it quickly, repair it at full speed. We should repair it as soon as something like this happens. Fu Baogua's expression was steely. "Marshal Fu, the gap in the wall can't be repaired." The Janissary general's expression was grim as well, a scar on his forehead still oozing blood. "The gap is on the abdomen, right in the middle, it's protruding outwards now." Fu Baogua's body swayed when he heard the news. The middle of the wall was protruding outwards? This was definitely the most fatal damage, the kind that was second to none. Now, as long as Han Sanha sent his men to attack this point, even if they could defend it with all their might, the prolonged pressure would only make the protruding part protrude more and more. The final outcome would be a cave-in. Once the collapse was real, it would be the end of the Fortress of Resilience and the end of the Fortress of Resilience. "How much is it protruding?" Fu Baogua asked anxiously. "A handful." The Janissary general answered. Fu Baogua turned and walked in that direction while Sun Zihu and the rest followed closely with grim expressions. As generals of the border, they understood the severity of the situation and wanted to know what was going on. Fu Baogua looked down from the top of the wall. It was as he expected. Below, about 30 feet from the top of the wall, there were 2 large rocks protruding slightly. Perhaps the front wall was inconspicuous and insignificant, but to the Fortress of Resilience, it was a fatal flaw. The collapse of a 100-mile dike was caused by an ant's nest. The collapse of an undefeatable fort at a single point was more than enough. It was too fatal. With Han Sanha's experience, military training, and sharp vision, he would never let go of this place. In fact, the reason why Han Sanha had attacked so fiercely without regard for the cost was because he was waiting for this moment. Chapter 478. Based on my current estimation, I can hold on for another 3 days at most. Fu Baogua shut his eyes tightly, feeling like he had used up all his strength. If he had not been holding on, he would have collapsed to the ground. Hundreds of thousands of lives had been lost here. Could it be that they could not hold on any longer? Fu Baogua had thought that the Fortress of Resilience could hold on for at least another 20 days under his command. Unless he was faced with a tragic situation where he had no soldiers to deploy, the Fortress of Resilience would never fall. No matter how capable Han Sanha was, he could only attack and defend in a well-behaved manner. After fighting for some time, the reinforcements kept coming, especially the Western troops' arrival, which gave Fu Baogua more confidence. The military intelligence also informed him that old Marshal Qiu Jianhan was rushing here with his army. They would arrive at the Fortress of Resilience in a day at most. This made Fu Baogua's hope grow. He was confident that he could definitely hold on until old Marshal Qiu arrived. Once the troops were united, they could fight Han Sanha together. Then, Yutang's army would only need to hold on until the 9 Supreme's lords came to help and the eastern border would be completely safe. Alternatively, they could continue to hold on and exhaust Dongxuan's million-strong army to the point where both countries could no longer hold on and the war would naturally end. Even though Dongxian had sent the entire nation's military force to invade, the Fortress of Resilience had the eastern border, the western border's elites, and old Marshal Qiu's reinforcements. Their capability was not too far behind, especially when they had an impregnable fortress like the Fortress of Resilience to rely on. The defending side would still have the upper hand in a battle. If they continued to wear the enemy down, Dongxian would suffer a greater loss based on the current casualty ratio. Yutang's chance of winning this war had risen from the initial 10% to the current 30%. The tide had turned. However, Fu Baogua realized that his assessment was only his own wishful thinking. Han Sanha was indeed Tianxuan's publicly acknowledged top general. He wondered if he had been planning for this since the beginning. If so, he would be terrifying. Such a drastic change in the Fortress of Resilience's walls made Fu Baogua lose all hope. The old marshal's troops were about to arrive and the tide of the war was about to turn, but at this crucial moment, a flaw had appeared. The wall was faulty. Unfortunately, there was no way to repair such a position. Could it be that the heavens want me dead? That the heavens want Yutang dead? Fu Baogua let out a long sigh. Chance. The chance that Han Sanha had been waiting for had finally arrived. Everyone, charge. We must take down the Fortress of Resilience within the next day and night. Han Sanha issued his orders, no matter the cost, no casualties. We must take down the Fortress of Resilience, even if the 300,000 soldiers in this battle are to be sacrificed. All the Dongxian warriors were baffled by Han Sanha's crazy order. But even though they were puzzled, this order was strictly carried out. Everyone went out to make their preparations. They were determined to fight to the death, determined to fight to the death. Zhang Gu looked at his teacher. Teacher, the situation we're most happy to see has happened. There's a huge problem with the enemy's wall, and it's already foreseeable that the Fortress of Resilience will be ours. However, this should also be when the enemy's resistance is at its strongest. Launching an all-out attack now will definitely increase the number of casualties. There was no need to pay such a huge price at such a time. Zhang Gu was bewildered. Speed is crucial in war. We must take down the Fortress of Resilience before Qiu Jianhan arrives. Otherwise, there won't be a chance like this anymore. Han Sanha sighed softly. We can at least drag it out for a month. There are pros and cons to this. The situation is already leaning towards us. Even if that old man Qiu Jianhan arrives, can he turn the situation around? Zhang Gu was still bewildered. Zhang Gu, you're a man who understands war. Can you really not see the current situation clearly? If it weren't for the flaw in the enemy's wall at this delicate juncture, the tide of the war would have been turned around completely. The tide would no longer be on our side. Han Sanha said in a low voice. Zhang Ji's expression changed as he said seriously, "Teacher, it's obvious that we have the upper hand in the current situation. Even without the flaw in the wall, taking down the Fortress of Resilience is only a matter of time. Why do we have to go this far?" Han Sanhe shook his head and said after a pause, "Dongxuan's entire military force has been gathered here in this war. While it's impressive, there are many hidden threats on our side as well. If it weren't for the four-nation alliance to besiege Yutang back then, this old man would never have suggested such extreme measures. If Zio could have killed Supreme Cloud in one fell swoop, there was no need to kill him. As long as he was trapped, Yutang would be annihilated in a short amount of time. However, not only did Supreme Cloud break out of the siege during the battle in Zio's capital, Zilong City, he completely shocked Zio's higher-ups. The Emperor of Zio also realized his own shortcomings because of that battle and ordered the Zio army that had already set out to retreat. Now, Yutang's western border is safe for the time being. There's also the southern border. After Supreme Cloud left Zilong City, he unexpectedly galloped to the southern border and joined the battle forcefully, causing the southern army to suffer a great blow to Daiyuan. Although the empire of Daiyuan's total military strength was not greatly damaged, their morale has fallen to rock bottom. They can no longer fight. With Tai Zheng guarding the north personally, it's as stable as a mountain. Therefore, the only four-nation war that still has a chance of taking down Yutang is our eastern border. However, Fu Baoguo's capability has greatly exceeded my expectations. The Steel Cavalry's harassment strategy that he has arranged has affected our supply line to a certain extent. The western border's reinforcements that have just arrived have stabilized the precarious Fortress of Resilience. If we wait for Qiu Jinhan's reinforcements, I can say with certainty that even if Supreme Cloud doesn't join the battle and Yutang is defeated, Dongxian will definitely fall as well. Now, do you still think that the situation is in our favor? Zhang Ji's expression changed drastically. Attacking the Fortress of Resilience in the most extreme way will cost many lives, but it has bought us time. If we really wait for Qiu Jianhan to come and take down the Fortress of Resilience, I'm afraid we'll have to pay 400,000 or even more, and there's still time. Why? The flaw is already there. It can't be changed. Zhang Ge was puzzled. Could it be that Han Sanhe could repair the wall just because he was here? Han Sanhe did not answer, only sighing. The blizzard began to fall once more. Amidst the blizzard, the war drums in Dongxuan's military camp suddenly thundered. Countless enemy troops surged up like a tidal wave. The long siege ladder was like a forest. Han Sanhe has discovered it. He's already launching his attack on this point. Fu Baoguo roared with all his might, "All brothers who can move, be it the eastern or western troops, defend with all your might." So many of us? There's no need to do this. Sun Zihu was shocked. Han Sanhe's attack this time will be an unprecedented all-out attack. It's an extreme attack. Fu Baoguo closed his eyes. We have to give it our all as well. Otherwise, the Fortress of Resilience will be lost from our hands before the old marshal arrives. If that happens, Yutang will really be in danger. This was a war that was destined to be devastating. This day was the 22nd of the 12th lunar month. Many years after the war, everyone in both countries remembered this date. Because of this day, it became a common holiday between the two countries. In Dongxian, it was known as War Souls Day. In Yutang, it was known as Loyal Souls Day. Every day on this day, the empire of Dongxian would fall into silence and have a day of rest. Yutang, on the other hand, would wear white mourning cloaks on this day. Incense and candles filled the air. The war was so devastating that in the end, both Yutang and Dongxian, even the elite veterans who had survived hundreds of battles and the iron-blooded men who were used to witnessing life and death wailed as they fought. It was too tragic. The top of the Fortress of Resilience's wall was filled with battles that were almost non-stop. No, it was no longer almost, it was a fierce battle all the time. Many of the exhausted Yutang soldiers who had been struggling to hold on used up the last bit of their strength. When they saw the enemy charging up the top of the wall, they charged up with their own bodies and hugged the enemy, charging down the wall that was 150 feet tall together, crashing to the ground below. This was their last resort. They would perish together with the enemy and go to the netherworld. In the end, they were not willing to lose anything. People were falling from the top of the wall like dumplings being dropped into a pot. War cries intertwined with each other, ringing endlessly. Steam billowed high into the sky, melting the falling snow in mid-air and turning it into droplets of rain that fell to the ground. However, even the rain could not wash away the gurgling blood on the ground. On such a frigid day, countless warriors were bare-chested, their hair disheveled as they fought in a frenzy. Their bodies were covered in crisscrossing scars. A warrior's scars had always been a badge of glory, and they were all exposed in front of everyone at this very moment. Regardless of friend or foe, everyone was fighting in a frenzy. The drumbeats shook the heavens. Fu Baogui yelled at the top of his lungs, "Steel cavalry! Fight!" To reduce the pressure on the wall, the steel cavalry had reached the point where they had to fight. Once they were out, it was a battle to the death. For Yutong. For father and mother. For brothers. Kill. The tightly shut city gate opened abruptly. Yutong's steel cavalry charged out like a raging dragon, crushing the Dongxian soldiers who were besieging the city with an unstoppable force. However, the steel cavalry was immediately drowned in the sea of Dongxian soldiers. There were too many Dongxian soldiers in front of them. Even with the steel cavalry's charge, they could not disperse, break, or even move. The dense rain of arrows fell like a downpour. When they fell, be it rain or snowflakes, they were all blocked by the rain of arrows. The steel cavalry charged to and fro in the enemy's formation like a raging dragon, trying their best to disrupt the rhythm of the reinforcement troops. Han Sanha's headquarters responded swiftly. Their old rival, the Shadow Cavalry, was already prepared, waiting for Yutong's steel cavalry's arrival. Yutong's steel cavalry had been in the limelight all this time. The Shadow Cavalry had long been seething with hatred. Now that the steel cavalry had finally entered the battlefield, they charged forward at once, launching the most extreme of attacks. One of the steel horsemen and his 3 brothers were separated from their group by the enemy, but they still charged forward with all their might, sweeping away all who stood in their way. The surrounding black horsemen were thrown off their horses, and in the blink of an eye, at least 20 to 30 corpses fell to the ground. However, his 3 brothers also fell off their horses one after the other, turning into meat paste. Seeing that the steel cavalry man was alone, the enemies who were already in a frenzy of bloodlust swarmed forward, intending to dismember him. Unexpectedly, the man raised his saber to the sky and roared thunderously, "Hold it!" When the surrounding Shadow Cavalry heard this, they were all stunned and stopped in unison. Until now, be it the Steel Cavalry or the Shadow Cavalry, despite the deep hatred they had for each other, there was also a similar level of admiration alongside the hatred. The Steel Cavalry lived up to their name of invincibility. The Shadow Cavalry lived up to their title of warriors. Faced with the order to stop at the last moment from the strongest enemy they had ever met, the Shadow Cavalry soldiers retracted their weapons in unison. The man stood proudly on his horse and guffawed. "The Shadow Cavalry is indeed an elite troop who is qualified to fight with my Steel Cavalry brothers for a lifetime. Just the fact that you stop now is enough for me to think highly of you." He raised his saber and said faintly, "The 3 brothers who charged with me were my 3 younger brothers from the same mother. Now that they're gone, as their eldest brother, I can't possibly let them fall into the netherworld and not even be able to recognize their parents, can I? So, allow me to fix their appearances." As he spoke, he leaped down like there was no one else around and strode forward in the forest of Shadow Cavalry, searching for the corpses of his 3 brothers and dragging them out one by one. In an open space, he wrung his blood-soaked battle robe and spat out a mouthful of saliva to wipe the faces of his brothers. However, the more he wiped, the redder their faces became. The more he wiped, the harder it was to see the true faces of the 3 people. "Catch!" A general of the Shadow Cavalry suddenly hollered, pulling the white towel from his neck and tossing it over. Another shadow cavalry soldier untied his water sack and tossed it over as well. Thanks a lot. Your father owes you. The man dipped the white towel in water and wiped his brother's faces clean. He then stood up quietly and said loudly, when you get there, remember to tell father and mother that we came together to fight for the country, to protect Yutong. It's an honorable death to die in the battlefield. We didn't embarrass father and mother. The only thing we've let down is that the four of us didn't leave any bloodline for old Xiao family. This is all my fault as the eldest. You all go to serve father and mother, I don't have to go. Such a grave mistake, I'll only embarrass father and mother if I go. Before his words echoed in the air, he burst into laughter, revealing his pearly white teeth. Blood flowed from his abdomen, but he did not seem to feel it. With a flip of his muscular body, he mounted his horse again and pointed the saber in his hand forward. Warriors of the Shadow Cavalry, thank you for your towels and water sacks. However, as the invader and the victim, which one of you will accompany me, Boss Qiao, on the road? The general of the Shadow Cavalry was stoic, his eyes glinting as he said loudly, you, Boss Qiao, are a good man? We, the Shadow Cavalry brothers, are not cowards either. However, this is a war between two armies. We, the Shadow Cavalry, will not fight you alone foolishly. Arrows. With his command, the Shadow Cavalry around him knocked their bows and aimed their arrows at Boss Qiao. Just like the general said, we, the Shadow Cavalry, are not cowards. We know that the enemy will die, but we will not risk losing another man to go with you. We are not that stupid. Amidst Boss Qiao's earth-shattering laughter, the rain of arrows poured down like a waterfall. Boss Qiao's laughter had yet to stop, the long saber in his hand had already left his hand like a bolt of lightning. At the same time, he and his horse had turned into a black porcupine. Iron porcupine. The long saber moved like lightning, flying over the heads of the Shadow Cavalry soldiers, cutting a Shadow Cavalry soldier and his horse in half 100 feet away. In the face of death, he still wanted to take a life with him. Since he had the will to die, how could he not reap the rewards? Salute. The general of the Shadow Cavalry gave the order and all the Shadow Cavalry soldiers raised their hands in salute to their enemy. In the final moments of his life, he had chosen to let these Shadow Cavalry soldiers off because they had given him time, towels and water sacks. That final, desperate strike was unstoppable. No one present had the confidence to block it. Boss Qiao had chosen to throw the saber out at the last moment, killing the enemy in the distance. He had not killed anyone around him. That was his final gift. Boss Qiao, who was like a human-shaped porcupine, still had his last breath. He and his horse stood silently, his muscular body still sitting on the horse, his back straight. As his blood dripped, he mustered the last bit of his strength to turn his neck, as if he wanted to turn his head to look at the fortress of resilience that was in the midst of a fierce battle. However, his last movement and last wish suddenly froze. He stopped moving. He had completely stopped moving. The general of the Shadow Cavalry urged his horse forward and bowed silently, saying in a low voice, "Don't worry. At least the moment you die in battle, the fortress of resilience has yet to be breached." With a crash, Boss Qiao and his horse fell to the ground, as if his last wish had been fulfilled and he had died without regrets. The Steel Cavalry only had one mission that night, to charge into the enemy's formation with all their might, to reduce the pressure on the wall as much as possible. A total of 5,000 Steel Cavalry charged into the enemy's formation, not a single one of them retreated, and not a single one of them fled. Everyone fought to the last moment. The leading general had the highest cultivation base and the strongest combat ability among the 5,000 Steel Cavalry. In the end, he charged left and right in Dongshuan's formation single-handedly, unstoppable. Wherever he passed, his spear was like rain and his sword like thunder, no one could withstand his charge. There were enemies all around him, new wounds appearing on his body continuously. However, he did not care. When the battle was nearing its end, as he looked around, he realized that the Shadow Cavalry had regrouped into their formation while his comrades were silent. With a loud roar, he turned his horse around abruptly and roared like a thunderclap, Han Sanha. Die! The man and the horse charged towards the central camp where Han Sanha was, like an arrow. He was charging into the marshal's camp alone, amidst a million-strong army. No one dared mock or ridicule such an unwise move, only the sound of his hooves thundering and his spear striking like lightning could be heard. He was still unstoppable, like the wind and lightning. Along the way, more than 70 soldiers of the Shadow Cavalry had perished on his path. Arrows! A loud cry came from afar. Hundreds of thousands of arrows rained down from all directions. It was a large-scale, indiscriminate attack that enveloped the many Shadow Cavalry soldiers who had gathered around the Steel Cavalry General. It could not be helped. Although the Steel Cavalry General was far from threatening Han Sanha's life, Dongxuan's higher-ups could not allow him to continue advancing like this. Otherwise, it would affect their side even more. Even if they had to sacrifice some of the Shadow Cavalry soldiers, they would not hesitate. Seeing the rain of arrows coming, the Shadow Cavalry General did not evade. Instead, he raised his spear and roared one last time, "The Steel Cavalry is here. Who dares invade my land?" The frenzied rain of arrows turned the Steel Cavalry General into a monument on the path of the charge. Even in death, the warhorse maintained its charging stance. The rider was still standing straight, his spear still gripped tightly in his hands. His eyes that were filled with hatred were still staring in the direction where Han Sanha's marshal's flag was fluttering. His mouth was slightly agape as if he was about to let out another thunderous roar. "The Steel Cavalry is here. Who dares invade my land? The Steel Cavalry is here. Who dares invade my land?" For some reason, a black cavalry general shuddered. "Who is this? He's killed more than 400 of my brothers along the way. I can't wait to kill this bastard with my own hands." No one answered. "Bury him." A Shadow Cavalry soldier walked forward slowly and helped the Steel Cavalry General off his horse. However, the spear in his hand glinted coldly. No matter how hard the Shadow Cavalry soldier tried, he could not pull it out. His other hand was gripped tightly on his sword as well, unable to loosen his fingers no matter how hard he tried. He was using his life to prove that whether he was alive or dead, he would fight until the very end, unwavering. Man and horse, along with saber and sword, bury them all. The Shadow Cavalry General could not hold back his tears anymore. In the face of such an enemy, who wouldn't admire him? The sounds of battle intensified abruptly. On the top of the fort, the drums thundered. Amidst the rain of arrows, Yutang's supreme marshal in the Fortress of Resilience, Fu Baogua, appeared at the highest point of the fort. "I am Fu Baogua." Fu Baogua's thunderous roar reverberated in the snowstorm, his voice reverberating throughout the universe. The entire battlefield could hear him. "I am here. Life and death are here. Fight." It was only 2 short sentences, barely a few words in total, but Yutang's side felt as if they had been injected with adrenaline. The marshal had come to the battlefield personally. He was standing at the most dangerous place, watching our battle. What else could they hesitate about? Fight. Fight. Fight to the death. Fight to the end. Fight to the end. Protect our homeland. For our comrades. For our parents. The soldiers roared thunderously. Their bodies that were initially sluggish from exhaustion suddenly became agile, their combat power increasing tremendously as if they were aided by God. In Dongxuan's formation. Deicide bow. Shoot Fu Baogua with all you've got. Countless arrows from the deicide bow converged into a torrential river, drawing a pitch-black trail in the air as they charged at Fu Baogua. Chapter 479. Fu Baogua stood unmoving amidst the rain of arrows. His eyes were calm and sharp as he paid close attention to the movements of Dongxuan's troops, constantly giving orders and commanding the troops. This was the most crucial moment. The countless personal guards around him raised their swords and shields, doing their best to resist the arrows that were like a tide. From time to time, the personal guards would let out muffled groans. That was because they did not dare to cry out in pain for fear of lowering their own morale. As long as the people who were hit by the arrows were fine, they would immediately retreat. They all knew that even if they were to die, they could not die here. If they died here, it would only cause trouble for their comrades who were fighting bravely. In less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, 40 to 50 personal guards had died in battle. However, even at the moment of death, no one made a sound. Fu Baogua stood there for a long time, unmoving. He was still issuing orders in an orderly manner, without the slightest bit of chaos. It was as if he didn't see the rain of arrows. He could not move. Yutong's warriors' exhaustion and even their morale had reached its limit. Standing here was the last resort he could use. Yutong's marshal was still here, sharing life and death with everyone. This was the final source of morale. Once Fu Baogua made a move, the morale would plummet and crumble. Fu Baogua understood this very well and had long since realized it. Even if I'm turned into a hedgehog today. But I still have to stand here and hold on until the very last moment. The guards desperately blocked the heavy deicide bows, many of them crying, "Marshal, let's retreat, our brothers can't hold on any longer." Fu Baogua had a total of 1,000 janissaries. 500 of them had died in the continuous battle. Today, there were a total of 160 people who had come with Fu Baogua, but now, there were less than 50 of them who were still fighting, doing their best to protect Fu Baogua. The remaining 110 people had already turned into human-shaped hedgehogs that were pierced with countless deicide bows and arrows. As Fu Baogua's personal guards, each of them had long been prepared to die protecting Marshal Fu. However, it was one thing to be prepared, but they also had an understanding of the current crisis. They could sacrifice themselves for Fu Baogua without hesitation, but they were unwilling to see Fu Baogua die. However, the current situation was an unstoppable death. Only by avoiding it would they have a chance of survival. However, Fu Baogua did not move. The only outcome would be all of them dying under the rain of arrows. Even if all the personal guards died here, it would not change the outcome. If the Fortress of Resilience falls today, I, Fu Baogua, shall die for my country. I've made a promise to live and die with the Fortress of Resilience. Today is the day I, Fu Baogua, fulfill my promise. Fu Baogua shouted loudly, if the Fortress of Resilience is defended today, I, Fu Baogua, will still be here. The sound was deafening, and it could actually be heard clearly on the battlefield. Today, at this very moment, Fu Baogua, am the Fortress of Resilience. The enemy's drums boomed as Han Sanha ordered coldly, send another 100,000 reinforcements and attack with all you've got. Take down the Fortress of Resilience. Dongxuan's formation was activated once more. Countless soldiers surged towards the Fortress of Resilience like a tidal wave as a deafening roar resounded, take down the Fortress of Resilience. Take down the Fortress of Resilience. Capture Fu Baogua alive. The personal guards no longer tried to persuade Fu Baogua, saving their breath to muster their remaining strength to deal with the rain of arrows. Those who could become Fu Baogua's personal guards were naturally his trusted aides, so they knew what Fu Baogua was thinking. Since the marshal had the intention to die for his country, the few of them could only stay here and show their loyalty to the country. The least they could do was to be a step ahead of the marshal. Before all of us perish, we must not let the marshal fall. The enemy began to mobilize their formation again, charging faster and faster as they drew closer. In the middle of the night, Han Sanha had already sent 100,000 soldiers towards the Fortress of Resilience. The situation could no longer be described as shocking. It was madness, extreme madness. The 100,000 soldiers did not include those who were still alive. In other words, there were 100,000 soldiers who had lost their lives at the Fortress of Resilience. Now, another 100,000 soldiers were sent to charge the enemy. Sun Zihu had brought his Western troop brothers, the most elite combat force of the Western border, but they were already numb from the battle. Watching the soldiers from both sides disappear in groups, the shock in their hearts had long surpassed the limits of what they could bear. So, this was how the Eastern troop fought. So, this was the situation that Han Sanha had to face. So, the battle here was actually so bloody and cruel. The so-called top general of the continent, the world's top fortress, and Yutong's top troop were all true to their reputations. Respect rose in Sun Zihu's heart. The Eastern troop is called the top troop of Yutong. It lives up to its name indeed. We can never hope to match it in this lifetime. Looking at Fu Baogua, who was still standing tall and straight, Sun Zihu's heart was filled with respect. Fu Baogua was indeed the top young man of Yutong's military. The Eastern troop is a hero, but we, the Western troop, are not cowards. Sun Zihu slashed 3 of his enemies off the wall with a single slash of his saber, moving swiftly as he shouted, "Brothers, we will live and die with the Fortress of Resilience today. We won't let our brothers from the Eastern troop have the upper hand. We swear to live and die with the land of Yutong, to live and die together, to live and to perish together." Countless Western soldiers roared in a frenzy, their emotions unprecedentedly agitated. The battle was getting more and more intense, but it was progressing in an unfavorable direction. There was no reversal because of Fu Baogua's disregard for his own safety as he stood under the rain of arrows and the western border's extreme outburst. More and more Dongxian soldiers popped their heads out from the top of the wall. Many of them had already charged up to the top of the wall to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the defending troops. High up on the wall, the leader of the Janissaries swung his sword and shield with all his might, deflecting the incoming arrows, but Fu Baogua was already pierced by 2 arrows. In spite of this, he was still standing there, commanding with composure, without a hint of panic. Marshal, the leader of the Janissaries, let out a low grunt. His shoulder had been pierced by an arrow, but it was followed by a wail of grief. The cry of the bodyguard leader was not for himself, but, "Marshal, I can't protect you anymore." Fu Baogua extended his hand, his sword unsheathing from under his ribs. Maintaining his standing position, he waved his sword personally to block the arrows as he hollered, "Order 30,000 steel cavalry to leave the fort and fight Dongxian to the death. The rest of the steel cavalry in the serving troop, disperse and follow the original plan to build another fortress of resilience for Yutong's army." It was the final moment. Fu Baogua knew that he could not hold on any longer. His own life was at stake, so he gave his last order immediately. "Even if I, Fu Baogua, die here today, Han Sanha, you'll have to pay with at least 100,000 lives if you want to enter the Fortress of Resilience." Just as the order was given, a white silhouette suddenly appeared beside Fu Baogua amidst the rain of arrows. Sword light flashed and sliced all the arrows that were shot at him in half. Everyone who saw the exquisite swordsmanship gasped in awe, but the white silhouette sword light did not stop there. It formed an indestructible barrier in front of Fu Baogua with its majestic sword light. All the deicide arrows were broken in front of this net of light. At the same time, a series of war drums rang out without warning. Dong, 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 countless Yutong soldiers charged up the fort like ferocious tigers, engaging the Dongxian soldiers on top of the fort. The Fortress of Resilience's perilous situation was abruptly alleviated. A troop galloped over, led by a man with fluttering white hair and a fierce expression. As he charged forward, he hollered, "Fu Baogua, your father orders you. Come down now." Hearing the voice, Fu Baogua's mind relaxed abruptly. Old Marshal Qiu had arrived. One of Yutong's strongest reinforcements had arrived. He had finally held out until old Marshal Qiu arrived. Countless cavalrymen charged out of the Fortress of Resilience like a tidal wave. They flowed endlessly like streams returning to their roots, their momentum unstoppable. Qiu Jinhan's reinforcements had finally arrived. They had arrived at the Fortress of Resilience's most critical moment. Working with Fu Baogua's steel cavalry, hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen charged out at the same time. With just a charge, they had forced Han Sanha's attacking troop back to where they stood, immobilizing them. At this time, a deafening gong rang in Han Sanha's camp. Dongxuan's follow-up troops who were about to reach the top of the fort retreated like the tide, not lingering for a moment longer. According to the original plan, Qiu Jianhan, who was supposed to be at least 200 miles away from the Fortress of Resilience, had led his army and arrived abruptly like a divine army descending from the sky at the most critical moment of the Fortress of Resilience. He had stabilized the situation and reversed the hopeless situation of the Fortress of Resilience's inevitable fall. Knowing that Qiu Jianhan had arrived and that the situation was hopeless, Han Sanhe, who was no longer able to attack, had ordered his troops to retreat at once. However, when he gave the order, he sighed deeply. Only a step away. Only a step away. At most, if Han Sanhe was given another hour, the Fortress of Resilience would be Dongxuan's. By then, even if Qiu Jianhan were to come, it would be futile. It would be impossible to reverse the situation. Why was it that at this delicate moment, the person who should not have appeared here suddenly appeared? Was God really blessing Yutong? No matter what, it was meaningless to continue fighting today. Dongxuan's troops had retreated. The entire Fortress of Resilience cheered in unison. Countless soldiers who were guarding the fort plopped to the ground as they cheered, unable to get up no matter what. The deafening cheers rang through the top of the fort. Today is Hua Manlu's birthday, and it's our beauty Ling Piaoping's birthday too. Let us wish both of them a happy birthday. I almost died of frustration today. I quarreled with my wife the entire day. I slept last night and didn't log off my QQ. When I woke up this morning, my wife was hugging my phone looking at me coldly. I was curious and asked what was wrong, but she insisted, "You have a mistress." I was dumbfounded. What? The evidence was clear. 2 messages had been sent by the same person on QQ. First, Feng Ling. I hate you. Second, you made me cry the entire night. I'm getting sadder and sadder. How could you do this? I wanted to cry, but I had no tears. I tried to explain to my wife, this is a touching story. My wife doesn't believe me. So I called her on QQ directly. Once the call was picked up, I was even more dumbfounded. It's really a girl's voice. What's more, the first sentence was, Master Feng actually sent me a voice message. Feng Ling, I love you, sister, your love is killing me. Inexplicably, a song suddenly popped into my mind, Andy Lau's, Thank You for Your Love. Chapter 480. The white silhouette who had appeared at the very last moment to protect Fu Baoguo was, of course, Bai Yixue. Of course, it could only be Bai Yixue. Old Marshal Qiu Jianhan had sensed the suffocating tension when he entered the Fortress of Resilience with his years of danger sense and had immediately asked Bai Yixue to assist Fu Baoguo to ensure his safety. With Bai Yixue's current cultivation base, it was beyond his ability to turn the tide of the war, but it was not an easy feat to protect a person and retreat from the current war. That was why he had soared through the rain of arrows and entered the battle to save Fu Baoguo. Bai Yixue's capabilities could probably be considered one of the top 10 swordsmen in the world. Comparing him to Jun Moyan, well, it was still incomparable. The gap between him and Jun Moyan, was still, however, Bai Yixue, who was already at the 6th heaven realm, was already at the pinnacle of this world. Although he was not at the pinnacle or the pinnacle, he was already at the pinnacle. His standard was similar to the 5 venerable lords. After the war, Qiu Jianhan patrolled the entire Fortress of Resilience. Even with his old but determined personality, he could not hold back his tears. The entire Fortress of Resilience could no longer be described as a scene of devastation. Perhaps it was not enough to describe it. The Fortress of Resilience had been completely destroyed. It was a scene of devastation and decay. Countless injured soldiers were snoring by the side of the road, their faces filled with exhaustion that could not be concealed. The wounds on their bodies were still bleeding, but they were sleeping so soundly that one could not bear to wake them up and heal them. There were also the veterans on the street. Although they said they were walking, they were dragging their legs. It was as if their legs weighed 1,000 kilograms and couldn't be lifted at all. Their faces were filled with indescribable fatigue and numbness. If they could sit down now, they would immediately snore and sleep for 3 days straight. There were not many buildings in the fortress that could still maintain their shape. In a siege, offensive weapons were used in every way possible. It was the same for defense. The best defense for the defending side was rolling logs and stones. Otherwise, when Fu Baogua had sent the steel cavalry to battle, he would not have asked the steel cavalry, who were tasked with heavy responsibilities, to bring back a piece of stone and a piece of rolling log each time they resupply, in exchange for supplies and arrows. However, the steel cavalry's replenishment of the logs and stones needed to defend the fort was utterly inadequate. The biggest replenishment could only come from the Fortress of Resilience itself. The building materials, beams, pillars, foundation stones, and tiles were all used. After the fierce battle, there were not many intact houses left in the Fortress of Resilience. It's too tragic. It's too tragic. Qiu Jianhan heaved a long sigh towards the sky, channeling everything he saw and the grief and indignation in his chest into his sigh. Fu Baogua, who was already exhausted and thin, did not go to rest immediately. Instead, he was supported to the marshal's hall, his legs trembling and his face pale, without the slightest hint of blood. Fu Baogua continued to recuperate and rest. It would be best if he could sleep for 3 days and 3 nights consecutively, but he persisted. He had to at least finish explaining the current situation to old Marshal Qiu before he could rest. Seeing Fu Baogua's pathetic state, Qiu Jianhan hurriedly stewed a 500-year-old ginseng that he had brought for Fu Baogua without another word. Only then did the injured and exhausted Fu Baogua look slightly better. "How's the current situation?" "Finish quickly and go rest," Qiu Jianhan asked. Fu Baogua's expression was ghastly. He knew that old Marshal Qiu would ask this question and was mentally prepared for it. However, the moment the question was asked, the piercing pain in his heart struck him once more. His voice was hoarse as he closed his eyes. "When this lowly official first came to the Fortress of Resilience, I brought 100,000 soldiers, 1,000 janissaries, and 300,000 soldiers who were originally guarding the Fortress of Resilience. That's a total of 415,303 brothers. The logistics personnel that followed were 108,600 people. After that, we received reinforcements one after another, including martial artists and even citizens who came spontaneously. For the past 2 months, there have been more than 60,000 brave men who came from all walks of life. These people include local armed forces, people from sects, martial artists, veterans, and young citizens, a total of 63,148 people. 150,000 brothers from the Western Line have come to our aid. Our total number of soldiers is 723,251 people. Up until now." Fu Baogua was sobbing in agony. 150,000 steel cavalrymen, there are only 93,000 of them left. The 30,000 fist troops have not been mobilized. The remaining defensive forces, including all the military branches, are only left with 179,409 people. Among them, there are also injured and disabled patients. Once Fu Baogua said this, Qiu Jianhan and all the reinforcements present paled. 420,000 people? Qiu Jianhan's voice was hoarse. "No. It's 420,842 people." Fu Baogua's expression was blank, but tears were falling from the corners of his eyes. The entire hall suddenly fell silent, so silent that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. At this moment, almost everyone felt as if their hearts were clenched tightly, as if they could not breathe. "This number is still increasing," Fu Baogua said. Fu Baogua said, "The medicine we've stored has long been used up. Now, every day, every hour, every breath, there are many gravely injured soldiers dying. Some of them are gravely injured, some are incurable, dying from blood loss, and some are barely hanging on. Now that the threat of the Fortress of Resilience has been lifted, they can't hold on any longer." Once they let out a sigh of relief, Qiu Jianhan stood up, his expression grim as he said, "I've long been prepared for this. We've brought enough medicine for this trip, a total of 1,200 carriages, as well as 3,200 healers. We've begun to act now. We'll do our best to save the eastern troops wounded. Shengguan Lingxiu. Qiu Jianhan ordered. This lowly general is here. Shengguan Lingxiu stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Raise the flag of the Shengguan family of generals. Let our brave brothers see that the family of generals still exists, at the eastern line today. Qiu Jianhan said solemnly. Yes. Qiu Jianhan turned to look at Sun Zihu and said faintly, Sun Zihu, if you can make it back alive after this battle, tell Marshal Wang Yunzhu. The soldiers under his command must be obtained. They didn't embarrass your father. The reputation of the Western troops elite is well deserved. Their desire to protect the nation and the people is not inferior to anyone. It was a very plain compliment, but it made Sun Zihu's tears flow like a broken dam. His voice was choked as he said, Thank you, old Marshal. This lowly general will report this to the Marshal without missing a single word. Qiu Jianhan hummed and thought for a long time before he said slowly, Since I've said it, I might as well say one more thing. Tell Marshal Wang that after this battle, whether this old man is dead or alive, ask him to go to the Qiu residence to kowtow when he returns to the capital. You, Sun Zihu, come along as well. Yes. Sun Zihu was almost roaring as he knelt on the ground and kowtowed twice. Sun Zihu kowtows to the old man on behalf of the Marshal. You'll definitely receive the Marshal's kowtow in the capital one day. Qiu Jianhan smiled and nodded. This rumored Sun Zihu was a smart man, able to understand the meaning behind his words. Very well. When others called Sun Zihu, Sun Zihu would be displeased, including Marshal Wang Yunzhu, who had been calling him that for almost a decade. However, there was only one person in this world who called Sun Zihu, Sun Zihu. Sun Zihu would feel honored and overjoyed. This person was Qiu Jianhan, old Marshal Qiu. It was not that Sun Zihu was especially willing to be Marshal Qiu's grandson, but there was another layer of history. Almost everyone in Yutong's higher echelons knew that the Western troops' Marshal, Wang Yunzhu, was actually old Marshal Qiu Jianhan's favorite pupil. More than a decade ago, when Wang Yunzhu was still a deputy general in the military, he had disobeyed the military order and did not return on time. Later on, it was discovered that this fellow had secretly gotten married during that period of time and his bride had even been snatched away. Disobeying orders and marrying in the midst of a battle were both major crimes in the military. Wang Yunzhu had committed two major crimes at the same time. As his teacher, Qiu Jianhan was enraged and punished him with 100 strokes and sent him to the western border to start as a laborer. He had even chased him out of the school and ordered him to never call himself Marshal Qiu's pupil ever again. Under normal circumstances, there was a 99% chance that Wang Yunzhu would never be able to make a name for himself in this lifetime. What mattered the most at that time was one's family background. A person who had been chased out of the school and whose teacher was an abandoned disciple of the highest echelon of the military would never be able to make a name for himself again. Therefore, no one had expected that Wang Yunzhu, who had fought every battle on the western border without a care for his own life, would actually rise to the position of the Western troops' marshal in just a dozen years. Qiu Jianhan had learned the truth of the incident later on. It was that Wang Yunzhu's fiancée had been fancied by a rich popinjay who wanted to force her to be his concubine. Qiu Jianhan's father-in-law, who was greedy for riches, had gone back on his word and agreed to the man's marriage proposal. How could Wang Yunzhu tolerate such a situation? In a fit of rage, he had charged into his father-in-law's house with his men, snatched his wife, and ran away. They had even held a banquet that very night to marry each other and enter the bridal chamber. Although there was a reason for the incident and both parties were indeed in love with each other, the truth was that he had still taken a woman by force. His father-in-law had reported the matter to the authorities. After learning the truth, Qiu Jianhan had annihilated the popinjay's entire family in a fit of rage. However, he had never allowed Wang Yunzhu to return. What was done could not be taken back easily. His master at that time could not be wrong. Even if he was wrong, he was right. Whenever Wang Yunju returned to the capital to report on his duties, he would kneel in front of Qiu Jianhan's residence. However, Qiu Jianhan had never opened the door. This matter could be said to be Wang Yunju's greatest regret. Since then, Wang Yunju had fought fearlessly and loved his soldiers like they were his children. However, he had been cursing incessantly, calling his mother and father all the time. He had also learned from his teacher, Qiu Jianhan. It could be said that the current Wang Yunju was almost a complete copy of the younger Qiu Jianhan. As he was promoted year after year, Wang Yunju would always discuss with his trusted subordinates before he returned to the capital, "Help your father think, how can your father marry into the old master's house?" However, no matter how Wang Yunju had tried and calculated, he had never been able to fulfill his wish. This had also caused Wang Yunju to have an inferiority complex. An abandoned disciple. The generals of the western border knew their marshal's sore spot. As the most trusted subordinate, Sun Zihu naturally knew the source of his marshal's pain better than anyone else. Even when he met old Marshal Qiu personally, Sun Zihu did not expect the old man to allow his marshal's return. He had just met old Marshal Qiu, and before he could say anything, he had not expected the old man to allow his marshal to return. His emotions were turbulent at this moment. He wanted to burst into tears to vent the frustration in his chest. Qiu Jianhan sighed. Just because of such a small matter, he was too ashamed to sheath his sword. No matter what, he refused to take back his order. He had been wasting his time until now. He had suffered for himself, that child Yunju, and all the people around him. It was all his fault. Sun Zihu could no longer hold himself back. He excused himself and went out to write a letter. The eagle sent the letter, sending the important news immediately. He could imagine how the marshal would feel when he read the letter. What if he were to die in this war? It was fine if he were to die, but such explosive news had to be sent back to the western border as soon as possible. This was the benefit that the marshal had earned from the western troops' outstanding performance this time. That fellow must be crying. Sun Zihu chuckled as he recalled the emotional words he had written, glancing to his left and right guiltily. I wonder what the marshal will look like when he cries. How ugly will he look? Just thinking about it makes me happy. I've been counting on this to live my entire life. No, how can I die? So be it. I must survive this war. Only then can I hope to see the marshal's pathetic state with my own eyes. Marshal Qiu said just now that this grandson of his is to follow the marshal to visit him. I'm qualified to see the marshal's pathetic state with my own eyes, a witness of this moment. I must live on. Sun Zihu made his wish inwardly after daydreaming for a long time. It was said that a woman's mind was not to be guessed, nor was a man's. Who would have thought that Sun Zihu, who looked tall and strong, would have such a meticulous mind? The flag of the Shangguan family of generals rose slowly. This was the first time in many years that the flag of the family of generals had been raised again. All the veterans who were still awake stood up in unison when they saw the flag. No matter how weak they were, they held on, mustering the last bit of energy they had left to stand up. On the flag that was embroidered with the crimson flying dragon cavalry, there was a long spear that was about to pierce through the heavens. It had long attracted everyone's attention. The veterans' expressions turned serious at once. They adjusted their postures to maintain the most standard stance before raising their hands to salute solemnly. In his eyes, he couldn't help but tear up. The flag of the Shangguan family of generals has finally appeared on Yutong's battlefield again. Chapter 481. Most of the new soldiers did not understand the meaning of this flag. The veterans around them first forced them to salute the family of generals' flag before they began to narrate and describe the past of the Shangguan family of generals bit by bit. 99% of the new soldiers saluted the flag once more with sincerity. Is there a problem with the wall? Qiu Jianhan listened to Fu Baogua pointing out the flaw in the wall. Both of them went to the spot where the problem was and bent down to take a closer look. For a long time, old Marshal Qiu did not straighten up. This old marshal, who had been through hundreds of battles and was best at military affairs, could see the problem clearly. The flaw in the wall was no longer the initial protrusion of a palm, but it was almost half a foot. With such a hidden threat, Yutong would not be able to last more than 5 days, even if their reinforcements had just arrived and their combat power was at its peak. Such a flaw was fatal. It had a great bearing on the morale of their own soldiers. Bai Yi. Qiu Jianhan called out to Bai Yi Shue and said hopefully, "It's this rock. With your cultivation base, can you?" Bai Yi Shue peeked over and pondered for a moment before he finally shook his head softly with a pained expression. "If it's just this rock, I can easily push it in. However, I can't guarantee that the rock that's pushed further away can be restored to its original state. It's more likely that when I push the rock, not only will it be useless, it will also shake the surrounding rocks, causing the wall to lose balance and become even more unstable." Bai Yi Shue's words extinguished Qiu Jinhan's last ray of hope. He understood what Bai Yi Shue meant. All the rocks that made up the wall were pressed together tightly like a single entity. Although this protruding rock had caused a flaw in the wall could still hold on for a while. On the other hand, when Bai Yi Shue pushed this piece back to its original position, it would look like it had returned to its original state, but it would actually cause problems in other areas that did not have cracks due to the immense pressure. If those cracks were to appear, the consequences would only be more fatal. If there was some time for Bai Yi Shue to push the rock in and repair the cracks, it could be done in a short amount of time. However, would Dong Xian give Yutong the time? Impossible. Fu Baoguo's expression darkened. He had thought that the old marshal's arrival would change the outcome of the battle, but he was still at a disadvantage. He asked softly, subconsciously, "Old Marshal, may I ask, when will the 9 Supremes Lords come?" This was what worried Fu Baoguo the most, and it was also the most direct way to get out of this predicament. Qiu Jianhan felt a stabbing pain in his heart. He could not help rebuking, "Fu Baoguo, what are you thinking?" Other than the main reason why he had persevered all this while, which was to fulfill his duty as a citizen of Yutong, another reason was to let Lord Supreme Cloud know that his mercy that day was not wrong. He had given everything he had, protecting the fortress of resilience with his life. Now, however, the wall now. Qiu Jianhan was hesitant. Fu Baoguo, on the other hand, grabbed a handful of snow and rubbed it harshly on his face and neck a few times. It was only then that he felt calmer. After stewing for a while, he finally suggested, "Old Marshal mentioned the last move. I wonder, what about the last move?" Qiu Jinhan's face was weathered. "This old man is thinking about the last move now." Fu Baoguo said, "May I ask, Old Marshal?" "This." Qiu Jianhan said with difficulty, "This last move can make the Fortress of Resilience last for another month. It's impossible for it to last any longer. Even if I were to use this move, this old man still doesn't have the confidence to really last a month against Han Sanhe." Fu Baoguo perked up. "Last for another month? Is it really 1 month?" Hearing the number, Fu Baoguo's eyes glowed. Even holding on for 1 more day was an extravagant hope to Fu Baoguo now. How could it last for another month? Now that he heard the words of holding on for another month, Fu Baoguo felt like he had come back to life. In spite of this, Qiu Jinhan's expression was grim. If he had a choice, he would never want to use this last move. Once this move was used, the Fortress of Resilience, the publicly acknowledged unbreakable fortress, would not be able to be used again for a long time. Perhaps it should be said that it would be destroyed. "May I ask, Old Marshal, what method is this? How can it be so effective?" Fu Baoguo asked excitedly. On the opposite side, Han Sanhe stood on a high point with a thick fur coat draped over him. He frowned as he looked at the Fortress of Resilience from afar and sighed faintly. "Teacher, the wind is strong on the mountain. Let's return to the Marshal's tent," Zhang Gu said. "Let's wait a little longer. I want to see if Qiu Jianhan will actually use that method," Han Sanhe said slowly. "That method? What method?" Zhang Gu asked, puzzled. "The last move." The last move to deal with the current crisis. Han Sanha chuckled humorlessly and said, I didn't expect to meet Qiu Jianhan after all. I thought that Fu Baoguo wouldn't be able to hold on for more than a few days. I didn't expect him to be reborn when I actually met him. Each of his moves were precise and orderly, and they were more appropriate than I imagined. Fu Baoguo has really grown up. If he survives this battle, the title of Tianxian continent's top general will probably change hands. Teacher, aren't you flattering Fu Baoguo a little too much? As long as teacher is still alive, the title of Tianxian continent's top general will never fall to anyone else. Zhang Gu exclaimed. Although Zhang Gu had fought Fu Baoguo before and had personally experienced Fu Baoguo's prowess, he had to admit that he would never be able to do what Fu Baoguo did if their positions were switched. However, Zhang Gu still did not agree that Fu Baoguo could replace Han Sanha as the next top general of the continent. Han Sanha paused and said, Do you know why I've chosen to increase the number of troops despite the heavy casualties? To continue the war? Zhang Gu said, Please tell me the details, teacher. Zhang Gu could not understand this as well. The current war was not on Dongshuan's side, the right time, the right place, the right people. However, his teacher had sworn to fight to the death no matter what. Chapter 482. The main reason is because of Fu Baoguo. Han Sanha said faintly. Because of Fu Baoguo? Zhang Gu was even more confused by the answer. Even if Fu Baoguo was skilled in strategy and tactics, how could he be worthy of his teacher's attention? If Fu Baoguo didn't live up to his reputation, or if he didn't perform so well, our army would have trampled Yutang a long time ago. Han Sanha chuckled bitterly. In this battle, you've only seen how I've sent countless Dongxian soldiers to the battlefield without regard for the cost. Do you know, who are the ones who have died in this battle? Let me tell you now, other than some of the generals in the military, most of them. A mocking smirk hung on Han Sanha's face. You can even say that the armed forces of the many families in Dongxian have all been buried under the Fortress of Resilience in the previous war. After this war, Dongxian will be unusually easy to govern. Even if we lose this war, more than 80% of the internal threats in Dongxian will be wiped out by me. A hint of coldness flashed across Han Sanha's face. However, whether we win or lose this war, as long as I return to the country, I won't have another chance to lead an army for the rest of my life. So, do you still think that there's a problem with what I said just now? As long as Fu Baoguo survives this war, he'll really be the next top general in Tianxian. Those families who have suffered heavy losses will never let me go. His Majesty will have to give them an explanation for the balance of power in the country. As the person directly involved, I'll be the scapegoat. It's inevitable. It's also because of this reason that I can't retreat. Qiu Jianhan and Fu Baoguo have come here with the intention to die, but what they don't know is that I, Han Sanha, feel the same way. As a soldier, dying on the battlefield is much more honorable than dying on a sickbed or being attacked by a political enemy. This land that's soaked in blood, other than being Qiu Jianhan's home, is also the home that I long for. As for why this war has to go on, how can I not know that the time, place, and people aren't on our side? But as long as I'm still fighting, the country can only choose to support me. On the other hand, if we retreat now, I will be imprisoned in the country until I die of old age. I might even be punished for my defeat, and my family will be exterminated. I might even be beheaded on the spot. Originally, these were still limited to me. Dongxian still has all of you. Even if I let go, even if I am worried, this is all I can do. But you have to know that there's another disadvantage if we retreat. Yutang will have 2 more invincible marshals and 2 more qualified marshals who are slightly inferior to them but not by much. Although Yutang is surrounded by enemies on all sides and is weak, Yutang's military will reach unprecedented heights because of this. Tai Zheng, Fu Baoguo, Leng of the south, Wang of the west, the commanders-in-chief of the 4 borders, all of them are the cream of the crop. How can our countries surpass them? Among the 4 generals, Tai Zheng is the publicly acknowledged invincible marshal in the continent. Such a character is actually inferior to Fu Baoguo because Fu Baoguo is an all-rounder and more importantly, Fu Baoguo is Fang Qingtian's disciple. Of course, Tai Zheng's impulsive personality has also determined this. Although Fu Baoguo is considered a qualified marshal, he isn't invincible. If he were to face Tai Zheng head-on, the chances of him winning would only be 50-50. Tai Zheng's chances of winning might even be slightly higher. However, after this war, Fu Baoguo's various abilities have been matured. Whether it's bravery, tenacity, ambushing, forbearance, tenacity, ruthlessness, he has reached the pinnacle of a general in all aspects. Han Sanha's voice was filled with emotion. Fu Baoguo has been thoroughly trained, but all of you are far from it. If I were to retreat from this war and disappear, when Yutang reorganizes its army to fight again in the future, all of you will definitely not be Fu Baoguo's or Tai Zheng's opponents. By then, be it Dongxian, Zio, or the gift of great primordial spirit, they will all be trampled by Yutang's iron hooves. It can even be said that the Nine Supremes' help is not the main point. Zhang Ge said indignantly, I don't think so, do I? Han Sanha smiled faintly and said, do you know that Fu Baoguo has a secret troop called the Serving Troop? Have you seen Fu Baoguo use this troop before? Zhang Ji's expression changed. No. Does such a troop really exist? Han Sanha said, there is. Yutang's steel cavalry is known as Yutang's invincible lion. When Tai Zheng left the eastern defense, he left a total of 150,000 men behind. From the start of the war until now, how many steel cavalry have you seen? Zhang Ge calculated and said, the steel cavalry this disciple has seen, there are about 120 to 30,000 of them. 120 to 30,000? Han Sanha shook his head. You've only seen 50,000 of them. Zhang Ge was indignant. How is that possible? And those steel cavalry who have been harassing us, how many troops are there? How many of them? Where are they? Do you know? Those steel cavalry belong to those I've never seen before. Those steel cavalry are scattered in the dark. Do you know what those people have done other than harassing us? Han Sanha asked. Zhang Ge was at a loss. What? Han Sanha sighed. The steel cavalry that Fu Baoguo had sent out never appeared even when the Fortress of Resilience was at its most dangerous, let alone providing aid. It's obvious that these people have strict orders that forbid them from getting involved in anything other than their mission. If I'm not wrong, even if we had breached the Fortress of Resilience that day, those steel cavalry still wouldn't have appeared. They would have only turned into an eternal threat to Dongxian. If Fu Baoguo had used either of these two troops, the steel cavalry and the serving troop, I would have had absolute confidence in taking down the Fortress of Resilience. However, these two troops have never really appeared. Their purpose is, Han Sanha said word by word, to keep our shadow cavalry here, not daring to move. Zhang Ge was hit with a sudden realization. Fu Baoguo's trump card is also my trump card. When the advantages and disadvantages of both sides are clear, it's a battle of who is bolder, more meticulous, and more daring. Fu Baoguo has been able to fight until now when his overall ability is at a disadvantage. Han Sanha squinted and sighed softly, he's truly qualified to fight me head-on on the battlefield. Zhang Ge was shocked. His teacher had never given anyone such a high evaluation, not even Tai Zheng back then. He did not expect Fu Baoguo, who had been beaten to the brink of death, to receive such a high evaluation. Therefore, this battle can't end here. Even if it does, Fu Baoguo must be killed first. Han Sanha said, leaving Tai Zheng alone, as long as we target his weakness, there's room for maneuver. But Fu Baoguo must die. As long as there's no Fu Baoguo on the eastern border, the empire of Dongxian can live on for another 300 years. Zhang Ji's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly said, but the other countries, the other countries? Han Sanha chuckled mockingly. The empire of Zio is doomed after this incident. The empire of Dayuan is scared out of its wits by Supreme Cloud. Shenxiai of the north is already at its limit when faced with Tai Zheng's ferocious attacks. It doesn't even have the strength to retaliate. What other countries are there? Han Sanha snorted heavily. The one who unifies the world in the future will be either Dongxian or Yutang. There won't be a third country that can lay a finger on the entire Tianxian continent's bountiful land. Zhang Ge was shocked. It turned out that Yutang held such a high position in his teacher's heart. He subconsciously raised his hawk eye to look at the Fortress of Resilience. Suddenly, he cried out, "Teacher, they're moving." Han Sanha said faintly, "Have they started splashing water on the wall?" Zhang Ge nodded. "Yes. They're splashing water." Suddenly, his expression changed. "Teacher, it's obvious that they're trying to make use of the frigid weather to turn the water into ice. Then, the wall will become impenetrable. Even if there's a mark, a basin of water will be poured over it and it will recover immediately. It might even be more secure. How can we fight this battle?" Han Sanha smiled faintly. This is Qiu Jinhan's last resort. It seemed that this old man was also at a loss for what to do with that gap. "I have no choice but to use the frozen city move." He turned and descended the mountain, saying faintly, "It's a pity that he doesn't know that this is what I've been waiting for." Zhang Ge was confused. Facing an impenetrable fortress like this, what other countermeasures did his teacher have? Chapter 483. The Fortress of Resilience was closed. Fu Baoguo's eyes, which had initially been muddy and dull, were now radiant. He watched as buckets of water were poured down, slowly turning into solid ice in the frigid weather. It was as if a layer of armor had been added to the fortress wall. As the process repeated, an hour later, the entire outer layer of the Fortress of Resilience's wall had an additional layer of ice. It was a crystalline, slippery, but unusually sturdy wall. All the damages on the Fortress of Resilience's wall were covered by the layer of ice. There were no longer any gaps. Fu Baoguo touched it excitedly and slashed it with his sword, testing the new wall's sturdiness with his own hands. Snow and ice flew everywhere from the slash, but the main body of the wall did not show any signs of damage. Although the ice wall's sturdiness was slightly inferior, it could still be used. Most importantly, such an ice wall could be easily repaired even if it was damaged. A few buckets of water could be poured over it and the repair would be completed after a short wait. Great idea. What a great idea. Fu Baoguo was trembling, his eyes gleaming as he guffawed. Old Marshall's idea is truly a stroke of genius. Why didn't I think of such a good idea before? Han Sanha, I'd like to see how many lives Han Sanha has to fill up this Fortress of Resilience. Don't destroy the ice wall, don't destroy the ice wall. In spite of this, Qiu Jinhan's expression was completely different from Fu Baoguo's delight. Old Marshal Qiu's expression was somber, his gaze worried. He looked like he had a lot on his mind. Fu Baoguo asked in surprise, "Why is old Qiu like this?" "The Fortress of Resilience is like an iron wall now. Even if Han Sanha has 3 heads and 6 arms, it'll be hard for him to shake it. With such an ice wall, even if he damages the outside today, it'll only take a night at most to recover to its original state. The Fortress of Resilience will be impregnable and we can rest easy." Qiu Jianhan chuckled humorlessly. "I wouldn't be surprised if someone else thought so, but you, Fu Baoguo, shouldn't have thought so." Fu Baoguo was taken aback. He was an intelligent man, a commander who knew his soldiers well. He immediately thought that the old marshal's ice wall tactic should have some sort of limitation, but what was it? While he was delighted, he had also thought about the drawbacks of this tactic, but he had never thought of a way to break it. It was because he had put himself in his shoes that he was so delighted. Was there something that he had missed out on? Qiu Jinhan's expression darkened when he saw Fu Baoguo's contemplative expression. He said, "Baoguo, order the logistics department to prepare more kerosene and fire arrows." He especially had to prepare a large amount of water to prevent Han Sanha from attacking them with fire in the ensuing battle. Then, order the steel cavalry and the serving army to conserve their strength and be ready to fight to the death. After saying that, he went down worriedly. Fire attack? Fu Baoguo was still puzzled by the old marshal's words. Water and fire countered each other. This was a simple truth that everyone knew. When he had put himself in the ice wall's shoes to come up with a strategy, he had considered using fire as well, but to use fire against an ice wall at this time of the year? It was easier said than done. That was why he had rejected the idea when he had only thought of the beginning. What was the old marshal talking about in such a serious manner? Besides, even if the other party were to attack with fire, he could still prepare a large amount of water and sand, but why did he have to prepare kerosene and fire arrows as well? Was he afraid that the other party's fire was not strong enough and would only add fuel to the fire? This order was getting more and more mysterious and unexpected. Fu Baoguo could not help but let his imagination run wild. It looked like there was still a considerable gap between him and the famed marshal back then. He needed to continue working hard. Fu Baoguo was still thinking about this as he followed Xiao Jianhan down the wall. He could not figure out where he had misjudged the situation. It was at this moment that he heard a commotion in front of him. Looking towards the source of the voice, 12 sturdy young men who looked like 12 calves were arguing with several old soldiers. The argument had even turned into physical contact. The leader of the group was currently struggling until his face was flushed red. He shouted with all his might, "We are only looking for a person, how can we violate the law? We're all Yutong's people, what right do you have to treat us like this?" The veteran who was holding the youth grinned menacingly. "Insolence. You have no respect and your mouth is filled with disrespectful words. Who else should we take if not you? You've not only broken the law, you've committed an unpardonable crime." The youth looked aggrieved. "Who have I disrespected? We're really here to join the army and serve our country. The 12 of us are here to fight against Dongxian. How are we unpardonable? We're not spies. Open your eyes and take a good look, we're all Yutong's people." Qiu Jianhan and Fu Baoguo heard it from afar and exchanged a glance, their hearts filled with suspicion. "Go over and have a look," Fu Baoguo ordered his janissaries. As for Fu Baoguo and Qiu Jianhan, they would not go over personally. No matter how confused they were, this was a critical and sensitive period. What if the other party was really a spy and both of them were assassinated? Even if the assassination was not successful, such an incident would cause the already unstable morale of the army to waver once more. The morale of Yutong's army that had just been stabilized could not be shaken by such an incident. A few of the janissaries walked over and clarified the current situation with just a few words. The process of the incident was actually very simple. The 12 youths who claimed to be here to join the army each had a fine warhorse with them and their equestrian skills were impressive. The cavalry general was naturally delighted to see them. Even the steel cavalry general's eyes shone when he saw them. Of course, the most pleasant surprise was still the 12 warhorses. Every single one of them was an extremely fine colt. Especially a few of the warhorses, they were all over 8 m in length, had long legs, and were extremely strong and vigorous horses of the highest quality. They did not need much training, only a little training was needed for them to be the vanguard of the battlefield. The cavalry general, who loved horses as much as his life, went forward to chat, wanting to recruit the youths. This group of youths were all children from remote mountain villages. Each of them was simple and honest. When they were asked, they blushed. Everyone roared with laughter and liked them even more. Soldiers who had been on the battlefield for a long time preferred honest, simple, and honest youths over smart kids. However, this fondness stopped when one of the children asked curiously, "May I ask, big brothers, there's another important matter for us to do here. We need to find a few people and send a letter to them." An old soldier smiled and said, "Who are you looking for? Tell us. Even if we don't know, we'll ask around for you." I believe there will be news very soon. The teenager said dumbly, there are 3 people who can receive the letter. One is called Xiao Jianhan, another is called Fu Baogua, and the last one is called Shengguan Lingxiu, a female general. Any one of these 3 will do. As soon as these names came out, the entire place fell into a strange silence. Many of the battle-hardened veterans in the surroundings no longer looked at the group of teenagers with friendliness in their eyes. Instead, they were filled with murderous intent. Many pairs of calloused hands quietly touched the hilts of their sabers. How bold! It was only their first day joining the military, but they were already asking about old Marshal Qiu, Marshal Fu, and the Shengguan family of generals. Not only were they bold, but their ulterior motives were obvious. Thinking deeper, these 12 youths looked simple and honest, but each of them had a top-notch precious horse. This in itself did not match the image of them coming from the countryside. It was obvious that there was a big problem. One of the officers sneered and said faintly, "May I ask who asked you to look for these 3 people?" The teenager scratched his head and said, "It's our teacher. Before we left, our teacher wrote us a letter and asked us to pass it to one of these 3 people, no matter who it is." The officer's tone was even more hostile. "Your teacher? Who's your teacher? Could it be that he knows any one of the 3 people you mentioned just now?" The sarcasm in his tone was no longer concealed, it was blatant mockery. "How dare your teacher claim to know the 3 sirs? Even if he only knew any one of them, it was all nonsense." The teenager did not hear the officer's mockery. Just as he was about to reply, he was suddenly at a loss for words. He stammered, I can't say. I can only say it after I see these 3 people." The officer smirked. "You can't say? Very well. Since you can't say it, men, take down these spies." The veterans were already prepared for this. They swarmed forward at once, intending to capture all of the teenagers in front of them. Unexpectedly, the skills of these little fellows were extremely slippery, and they were not to be trifled with. Even when they were surrounded by the joint forces of so many veterans, they were still able to attack and defend, and were not at a disadvantage at all. It could even be seen that they did not want to injure others. Otherwise, those veterans would have most likely died in the hands of these little fellows because they had underestimated them from the beginning. However, when they observed the details of their attacks, the officers were even more enraged. This was a life-saving technique that only veterans who had been through hundreds of battles would possess. Where did these teenagers learn it from? Was there even a need to ask? There was no room for discussion about their ill intentions. Take them down. Take them all down. Kill anyone who resists. What are you doing? We've been merciful, okay? We're really here to look for someone, there's really a letter. We only asked for Qiu Jianhan and Fu Baogua's names. What crime have we committed? The officers were even more enraged. F***ck, you've already exposed yourselves, yet you still dare to play dumb in front of your father. Did I ask you to show mercy? Just as the general was about to give the order to kill, a stern voice suddenly rang, "Stop." Chapter 484. Old Marshal, be careful of Han San's trick. Fu Baogua was shocked. Don't worry. Qiu Jianhan was assured. With Bai Xue and Fang Mafei protecting him at close range, there were not many people in this world who could kill him with a single blow. Not to mention a few half-grown kids. Based on the current situation, the teenagers had indeed shown mercy and there was no sign of them lying. What kind of person was old Marshal Qiu? Naturally, he would not take things for granted like the veterans. The so-called flaw in their hearts would not be a flaw at all. A true spy would wish that they could conceal themselves to the point that there was nothing special about them. Why would they come in a group of teenagers, bringing along a dozen fine horses and calling out their target's name directly? It was even more bizarre and illogical. This old man is the Qiu Jianhan you're looking for. Old Marshal Qiu looked at the children with a smile. Who asked you to look for me? Where's the letter? It was still the leader of the teenagers who asked suspiciously, You say that you're Qiu Jianhan, but what proof do you have? You're the boss of these bad guys, we don't believe you. This sentence was a stroke of genius. Qiu Jianhan was stunned. Yes, I say that I'm Qiu Jianhan, but what proof do I have? Fu Baogua could not help chuckling as he strode out and said, I'm the Fu Baogua you're looking for. Do you need proof too? The children in front of him said blankly, Of course, proof. What right do you have to say that you're Fu Baogua? We've just said that we're looking for the both of you and the both of you have come out. How can there be such a coincidence in this world? Do you think we're fools? Fu Baogua was speechless. Qiu Jianhan said, amused, This old man has roamed the world for so many years and no one has ever asked for proof of identity when they see me. This is an eye-opener for this old man today. At this moment, the soldiers beside them bowed respectfully. Greetings, old Marshal Qiu, greetings, Marshal Fu. The teenagers were shocked, their heads spinning as if they were dreaming. You, this. Qiu Jianhan is actually a marshal? Fu Baogua is also a marshal? Is that Miss Shengguan also a grand marshal? I. The 12 youngsters were thrown into confusion in the wind. They were completely dumbfounded. A few of them paled. They still did not know who Qiu Jianhan and Fu Baogua were, but they knew that the marshal was a high-ranking official. At least, this official was the highest in the Eastern Fortress of Resilience. All right. This old man is getting more and more interested in knowing who your teacher is. Now that it has been proven, can the letter be taken out? Qiu Jianhan guffawed. He had not seen Qiu Jianhan like this for the past few days. These children were a rare source of joy. Fu Baogua, who was also doubted, was amused as well. Ah, the letter is here. The teenager was flustered. He untied his cotton-padded jacket and put his hand into his underwear. After fumbling for a long time, he finally took out a small bag that was tightly wrapped in animal skin. He opened them layer by layer, and there was a letter inside. One of Qiu Jianhan's janissaries took a step forward and took the letter, turning to pass it to Qiu Jianhan respectfully. Qiu Jianhan took the letter and opened it absent-mindedly as he asked, Who is your teacher? What is his surname? Why is it so weird? The teenager answered respectfully, Teacher said that his surname is Yun. Qiu Jianhan's hand that was opening the letter froze. A sharp glint shot out of his eyes. Where is your teacher now? As he blurted out this question, an uneasy feeling suddenly surged in his heart. Then, he stuffed the letter into his robe and said urgently, Everyone here, follow this marshal to the marshal's tent and bring these children here. Martial law is to be enforced in the entire city. No one is to act recklessly. Those who act recklessly will be dealt with according to military law. Then, he took the lead and strode away. Fu Baogua shuddered as well, catching up quickly. His expression was unprecedentedly stern, there was no trace of a smile on his face. The few children were escorted by a group of military officers and generals as they came to the marshal's tent in fear and confusion. Qiu Jianhan finished reading the letter in unusual detail. His eyes glowed as he looked at the children in front of him. Other than this letter, did your teacher say anything else? The letter that old Marshal Qiu had placed so much emphasis on did not reveal any information at all. It probably only asked Qiu Jianhan and Fu Baogua to take care of these children. There was no information that old Marshal Qiu was really concerned about. Teacher said that he will arrive in half a month at the latest. The children spoke with a tinge of fear. Looking at the heavily guarded marshal's tent and the high-ranking generals that came and went, how could they not know that the person that their teacher had asked them to look for was actually such an important figure? It was already a testament to their mental fortitude that they could still speak in one sentence at a time like this. Half a month at the most. Qiu Jianhan and Fu Baogua's eyes glistened when they heard the words, their hearts filled with ecstasy. The way they looked at the children was like they were looking at peerless treasures. Your teacher, how is he now? Qiu Jianhan asked after some thought. He's not doing well. Many of the bones in his body are broken. When we left home, teacher still couldn't stand up. I've never seen anyone with such heavy injuries in my entire life. The leader of the group hesitated for a moment before muttering. Qiu Jianhan's expression turned grim at once. Many of his bones were broken and he could not stand up. Even a high-level cultivator would find it difficult to recover from such injuries. How could he arrive within half a month? Still, there was news. No news was good news, but it was even better to have news of his survival. What does your teacher look like? Fu Baogua pondered for a moment and finally asked a question that Qiu Jianhan had been wanting to ask but dared not ask. The youth was deep in thought, scratching his head so hard that his dandruff fell like snowflakes. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "It's really hard to say. Teacher shouldn't be that old, but because his injuries are too severe, we can't see his true appearance. Anyway, he's covered in scars. Injuries aside, he's still very impressive." Fu Baogua was speechless. He might as well not have said it. Should he not have asked just now? Perhaps, this was the main reason why the old marshal did not ask this question. Wang Dinghua. Fu Baogua hollered, "I'll leave these children to you. Take good care of them, try not to lose any of them." Wang Dinghua agreed, "Let's go." The children said hurriedly, "We don't want to be watched. We're here to fight Han Sanhe, to protect the country. What's the big deal about being watched? We've inherited our teacher's teachings, we want to go to the battlefield and earn merit to go home." Fu Baogua laughed. "When did I say that you're not allowed to go to the battlefield? As long as you follow Wang Dinghua, you won't have to worry about not having merit to earn. However, the most important thing on the battlefield is military law. The first thing you have to learn is to obey. You may leave." The few of them obediently went down the stairs. Watching the children leave, Fu Baogua turned to look at Qiu Jianhan and said tentatively, "Old sir, do you think?" Qiu Jianhan frowned as well. "This old man can't be sure either, I dare not say anything." He looked at Fu Baogua meaningfully and said, "But there's one thing I'm sure of, the other party is definitely one of us." Fu Baogua was overjoyed. "Then is it Lord Supreme Cloud?" He could tell that the old marshal was unwilling to delve into this topic, but Fu Baogua was excited and could not help wanting to get to the bottom of it. Qiu Jianhan sighed and said, "That person only said that his surname is Yun, but someone with the surname Yun might not be Supreme Cloud." Fu Baogua was stunned. Since he said that his surname is Yun, who else could it be if not Supreme Cloud? Qiu Jianhan glared at him. There are plenty of ace cultivators with the surname Yun in their names. Other than Supreme Cloud, there's also the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, the Seven Steps Killer Sword, Yun Xiaoyao, who hasn't shown himself for a long time. Even Yun Xiaoyao's son, Yun Yang, is an ace cultivator with an amazing cultivation method that stands out among Yutang's younger generation. Other than the two of them, only Supreme Cloud is left. Supreme Cloud has always used the identity of Supreme Wind as a cover, so if his surname is really Yun, Supreme Cloud is definitely not the first choice. This teacher Yun is one of the three of them, there's no doubt about it. As for who it is, we'll only know after we come. Fu Baogua could barely contain his excitement as he said, "Yes, yes. No matter who comes, it's a good thing. It's just that, forget about young Master Yun Yang, he wouldn't be of much use even if he came." Qiu Jianhan looked at Fu Baogua meaningfully and said slowly, "That might not be the case. If young Master Yun were to come, he might not be any less useful than Marquis Yun. He might even be able to produce a stunning effect. Do you think this old man was just saying that he would stand out among Yutang's younger generation?" Fu Baogua asked, "Could it be that the child is a cultivation genius and is already stronger than his ancestors?" Qiu Jianhan suddenly grew impatient and said, "Why are you asking so many questions? If a bastard like you can be stronger than your ancestors, why can't others? Why aren't you going out to watch your troops? Are you always lazing around here? Is this how you're supposed to be a marshal? Scram, scram. Scram, scram quickly. With spittle all over his face, Fu Baoguo walked out in a daze as he wiped it off. He could not understand why the conversation had been so harmonious. How had it suddenly turned into a barrage of bullsh *t? Could it be that young Master Yun was really capable? Or perhaps he was the one with the surname Yun that old Marshal Chiu was more inclined towards. It was highly possible. After all, the teenagers had said that although their teacher Yun's face could not be seen clearly, he was not old. The Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao, could not be said to be young. Supreme Cloud's cultivation base was unfathomable, so he should be a little older as well. It seemed that only young Master Yun could be considered young. If that was the case, the hopes that old Marshal Chiu and old Marshal Chiu had pinned on him would be dashed. Marquis of Heavenly Cloud's young Marquis, Yun Yang, was shockingly talented, but he could not be compared to Supreme Cloud. How could a mere Yun Yang compare to the 9 Supremes' think tank, Supreme Cloud? They were worlds apart, they could not be mentioned in the same breath. Fu Baoguo felt that he seemed to have found the reason for old Marshal Chiu's sudden change of attitude. In the marshal's tent, Chiu Jianhan, who was left alone, looked anxious and doubtful. He paced back and forth, mumbling to himself, "Is it you? Is it you?" Chapter 485. Today was the last day of the year. Tomorrow belonged to 2018. It had been 7 months since the 1st of June until today. 7 months of updates, 1,530,000 words. On average, 220,000 words per month. On average, 8,000 words per day. Compared to the previous books, this speed was very slow. However, it was not too slow. Thank you, everyone, for your support for Supremacy in this half a year. We have been together for a long time. Now, we are going to celebrate the new year together. I sincerely wish everyone a new year and a prosperous, smooth and happy year to come. Actually, before writing this book, I have been thinking about something. China's history since ancient times has been a process of dynasties rising and falling to fight for the world. Every hero has shone brilliantly in their own history. For their country, for their people, they have not hesitated to fight. In fantasy novels, sometimes, for the sake of pleasure, one can ignore the war of dynasties and only write about the gratifying and vengeful parts. However, I have always thought, do these fantasy protagonists and heroes not have their own countries? Do they not have their own nationality? What have they always believed in? A person can't just eat the food of the world and only think about becoming stronger, can he? Therefore, I have set up such a protagonist at the beginning of this book. He can be chivalrous, he can be gratifying and vengeful, he can roam the martial world, but he must have his own mission, his own desire to serve his country. He can fight in the martial world for his brothers. He can draw his sword in anger for his lover. However, he can also bleed on the battlefield for his country. They could also charge and break through enemy lines for their own people. Therefore, there is Yun Yang that everyone sees. The passion of the people has never cooled. We have never abandoned the belief of our country and people. I do not want to instill any truth into the people, nor do I want to awaken anything noble, but this is a character that I have always wanted to write about. A story that I have always wanted to write. War scenes are indispensable for such a protagonist. This book has to continue, and I will continue to write it seriously. What I can do is that this story may not be what some readers expect, but this story can make everyone laugh and cry for him. To be able to leave such a few people in everyone's memory long after the book was finished, Lin Sanjiu was shocked. For example, the 9 Supremes. For example, Yutong. For example, the Fortress of Resilience, Chiu Jianhan, Tai Zheng, and Fu Baoguo. In the new year, let us work hard together. I will work harder. I wish everyone happiness. Chapter 486. Shangguan Lingxiu had come as well. She walked in with two tall and slender female generals in tow. "Old Marshal, I heard that there's a letter for me." Qiu Jianhan was deep in thought when he heard her. Yes, it's here." He took the letter out. Shangguan Lingxiu glanced at it and was confused as well. "Who is this?" Old Marshal Qiu glanced at her and said, "He said his surname is Yun." Shangguan Lingxiu shuddered. "Lord Supreme Cloud?" Old Marshal Qiu's gaze fell on Shangguan Lingxiu's face and said, "Not necessarily." Shangguan Lingxiu's eyes shone brighter. "Is it young Master Yun Yang?" Old Marshal Qiu squinted and said, "This old man doesn't know." Shangguan Lingxiu smiled and said, "It's a good thing no matter who comes." On the other side, Yu Rulan and Ji Lingxi's expressions changed at the same time. Whether it was Supreme Cloud or Yun Yang, it was a good thing. That was true. It was also a good thing for the two girls. If Supreme Cloud were to come, both of them could ask about Supreme Wind from him. In other words, news of Ji Lingfeng. If Yun Yang came, the two girls gritted their teeth, determined to get even with this bastard. However, why was Shangguan Lingxiu so excited? Supreme Cloud's arrival was beneficial to the war, it was only natural for her to be happy. However, what was she happy about Yun Yang's arrival? Qiu Jianhan saw the change in the two girls' expressions and said, "These two look unfamiliar." Shangguan Lingxiu introduced with a smile, "These two are martial artists, highly skilled." Along the way, before she could finish, Yu Rulan had already said faintly, "Let old Marshal know. I'm Yu Rulan and this is my sister-in-law, Ji Lingxi." Qiu Jianhan squinted and said, "Good name." The old Marshal was a shrewd man. This Lady Yu Rulan was not one to speak much, a gentle and quiet girl. There must be a reason for her to speak first. Therefore, the old Marshal did not interrupt and waited quietly. As expected, Yu Rulan said, "My sister-in-law is young Master Yun Yang's fiancée." Supreme Wind's younger sister and fiancée could not be mentioned now. However, Yun Yang was young Master Yun's fiancée. The three of them were shocked when they heard this. Qiu Jinhan's eyes were as round as saucers while Shangguan Lingxiu turned around abruptly. Even Ji Lingxi herself was blushing at once. "Sister Lan, what nonsense are you talking about?" Ji Lingxi was rather perplexed as well. "When did I become that guy's fiancé?" Sister Lan was just spouting nonsense. Yu Rulan remained expressionless. Both she and Ji Lingxi had disguised their faces, so no one would be able to tell even if they were moved. He spoke slowly, "This young Master Yun is rather insensible, leaving us in Tiantang City and disappearing without a trace. We have come to look for him." But in his heart, he was exasperated at her for failing to live up to his expectations. "Sister, oh sister, you're so silly. Can't you see that this female general's feelings for Yun Yang are almost undisguised? If you continue to be embarrassed, Yun Yang might be snatched away by someone else." "Yun Yang's fiancé?" Shangguan Lingxiu asked in a daze. Qiu Jianhan frowned and asked suddenly, "How many fiancés does Yun Yang have?" "This old man has discussed with old Mistress Shangguan a few days ago and has already betrothed Lady Shangguan Lingxiu to Yun Yang. Why is there two fiancés now?" As the military's pillar, Qiu Jianhan was naturally on Shangguan Lingxiu's side. He was old and experienced, he could tell from Shangguan Lingxiu's words and actions. He could also tell that Yu Rulan's words were meant to strike Shangguan Lingxiu down. Therefore, he could not help but chime in. "You're so good at lying. This old man has lived for a lifetime, am I inferior to you?" Ji Lingxi's expression changed. "Is there such a thing?" Yu Rulan looked at Qiu Jianhan and said, "Old Marshal must be joking." Qiu Jianhan glared at her. "This is a military camp, there's no joking here. Get out, all of you. This old man's solemn martial tent has become a place for jealousy. What a scandal." With a wave of his hand, he chased them all out. When Shangguan Lingxiu came out, she looked at Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan. She had so many questions that she could not ask or speak. Ji Lingxi lowered her head as well, occasionally glancing at Shangguan Lingxiu. She could not help but feel that in terms of looks, she might be slightly better than Shangguan Lingxiu, but in terms of height, long legs, and heroic bearing, she could not compare. Yu Rulan had already planted a nail in Shangguan Lingxiu's heart. In addition, the three ladies had been rather close along the way, so Yu Rulan did not provoke her further and kept her mouth shut. The three ladies were silent, coming to a decision in unison. Everything would have to wait until the war was over. Old Marshal Chiu, who had followed them out to watch the show, was greatly disappointed. There was no quarrel. The three ladies walked back. Along the way, they saw groups of wounded soldiers who were bleeding and bandaged, but each of them was brimming with fighting spirit, their eyes filled with the determination to die. It was as if the brutal battlefield had only given them fearlessness and bravery, not the slightest bit of fear. Yu Rulan and Ji Lingxi were shaken as they watched Yutong's warriors shed their blood on the battlefield without regret. Suddenly, they seemed to understand why Ji Lingfeng had become supreme wind and why he would fight to protect this country. It was because these were a bunch of respectable people. What an amiable man. Of course, we're here to join the battlefield. By then, the three of us sisters will live and die together. Yu Rulan said. Shangguan Lingxiu smiled faintly and nodded. Thank you. As for the rest, I haven't considered it yet. Ji Lingxi said, unwilling to admit defeat, I haven't considered it either. Shangguan Lingxiu's mood had been heavy, but she could not help but smile when she heard what Ji Lingxi said. For the next 3 days, Dongxuan's camp that was stationed opposite the Fortress of Resilience did not make any moves. They could only watch as Yutong's troops poured bucket after bucket of water onto the top of the fort, allowing the water to seep through the cracks. Fu Baoguo was afraid that the weather was too cold and the water would freeze before it could seep through completely, so he ordered the soldiers to boil the water and pour it down directly. This way, they could prevent the water from freezing before it could seep through. As for the outside of the fort, they could just pour bucket after bucket of water down without concern. With such hasty actions, the Fortress of Resilience had turned into an ice fortress in just 3 short days. The ice and snow outside had reached a thickness of 2 feet. Even a deicide bow's close-range attack would not be able to penetrate such a thickness. Siege arrows could still penetrate it, but was there any meaning in using siege arrows to attack the layer of ice? At least, there was not much meaning. With this in mind, Yutong's troops' morale was greatly boosted. The shadow of defeat that had shrouded them previously and the path of defeat had long vanished. Even the clouds of war that had been suppressed for so long had dissipated at this moment. All of them were filled with confidence towards the victory of this war. Only Qiu Jianhan was still worried every day, his brows furrowed as he repeatedly checked on the fort's reserves and supplies. On the other side, Han Sanhe had been observing Yutong's movements. He saw that the Fortress of Resilience had finally stopped watering the fort after the 3rd day. After all, there was no longer any meaning in continuing to thicken the wall. The current scale was already sufficient. When Dongxuan's troops came to attack, they would bear the brunt of the attack and pour water on the wall after the battle ended. All of Yutong's soldiers were reassured, but the soldiers on top of the fort could feel the chill. It was a bone-chilling coldness that chilled their hearts to the bone. On the 3rd day, Han Sanhe summoned Zhang Gu. Han Sanhe summoned Zhang Gu and asked, "Have you prepared everything I asked you to prepare?" "They've been prepared for a long time." Han Sanhe's eyes glinted coldly. "Then, attack." Just as Han Sanhe announced the attack, Yutong's reinforcements arrived once again. This time, there was only one person, a person with the surname Yun. Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, who had not been seen for a long time, had rushed here from the north day and night. Now, Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, who had passed the bottleneck of the perfection of the peak realm and successfully ascended to the heaven realm, had arrived. Fu Baoguo was first overjoyed at Yun Xiaoyao's arrival, then he felt an indescribable sense of disappointment. F***ck, why did this fellow come? Even if it was his son who had come, this marshal wouldn't be so disappointed. After all, according to Qiu Jianhan's evaluation, Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao, was the lowest among the 3 Yuns. Qiu Jianhan was not surprised by Yun Xiaoyao's sudden arrival. He asked directly once they met, "How's the north?" Marquis Yun was still very respectful towards old Marshal Qiu as he replied, "The situation in the north is unusually stable. Marshal Tai Zheng has chosen to take the initiative and lead the army to fight Tianxi. He's won 3 out of 3 battles, his might unprecedented. Currently, Tianxi's troops have retreated 500 miles. Although both sides are currently in a stalemate, I believe there won't be any problems on Marshal Tai's side. The only regret is that Tianxi's troops are still increasing, so Marshal Tai doesn't dare send troops to assist the east." The Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao, was indeed Yun Yang's father in name. His appearance was equally outstanding. He was tall, handsome, elegant, and radiant, giving others a good impression at first sight. This humble one has been staying at the northern border for more than a year. Marshal Tai saw that the war has stabilized and discussed it with this marquis, requesting this marquis to assist alone. Thus, this marquis has traveled south through the night and has finally arrived at the Fortress of Resilience today to contribute my strength. Marquis Yun smiled gently. "I'm not too late after all. I can still make it in time for this war of the century and watch the ultimate showdown between the world's top marshals." Chapter 487. Qiu Jianhan was elated. "Marquis Yun has traveled thousands of miles to aid us. He has been a great help to us. This old man is grateful." Qiu Jianhan knew Marquis Yun's real identity well. Marquis Yun's arrival here was almost equivalent to His Majesty's arrival. No matter what decision Qiu Jianhan made, as long as Marquis Yun was here, Marquis Yun would shoulder the responsibility even if there were any mistakes afterward. The royal family would never have any suspicions. It was not that the old marshal was overthinking, but it was a method of self-preservation when the need arose. After all, the saying that a general would not obey the emperor's orders when he was away, that his merits would overshadow his master, and that the emperor and his subjects would be suspicious of him was the chief concern of a marshal. Although old Marshal Qiu was very sure that His Majesty would never suspect him, he still had to be wary of scoundrels in the imperial court. If the war was lost, everything would be over. If the war was won, there would always be people who wanted to reap the fruits of their labor. Regarding this, no matter how wise the ruler was or how prosperous the world was, there would never be a lack of such people. It was at this time that the war drums on the opposite side suddenly thundered as a shrill horn tore through the sky at the same time. The sudden sound was deafening, and the ground shook because of it. Dongxian is attacking. Fu Baoguo was rather taken aback when he heard the news that was both reasonable and unexpected. Facing such an impregnable fort, what right did the renowned marshal, Han Sanhe, have to launch an attack in broad daylight? Was he out of his mind? Or perhaps he had taken the wrong medicine. No matter how confused he was, Han Sanhe's attack was already right before his eyes. Fu Baoguo charged up to the top of the fort in a single breath and could not help sucking in a cold breath at what he saw. Dongxuan's army was densely packed, carrying long ladders that were as dense as a forest as they charged over. What made Fu Baoguo even more fearful was that he saw Dongxuan's shadow cavalry moving out in full force. They were like a black dragon that swam at high speed, shaking their heads and wagging their tails, ready to bite the enemy. What puzzled Fu Baoguo, or rather, was that there were also quite a number of people carrying long logs and large boulders. Were those not weapons used to defend the fort? Also, what were those people running with half of the ladder doing? Do we need these things to attack a city? Han Sanhe's attack was not a joke, was it? Han Sanhe's frontline troops pressed forward at the same time, pressing into the center of the battlefield. The 200,000 shadow cavalry that came this time were divided into 2 squads, their left and right flanks glaring at the battlefield like pincers. Follow the arrangement from the day before yesterday. All the archers in the army are to serve. Qiu Jinhan's voice came from behind. The old marshal's voice was unusually somber. We only need the archers to move for now. Han Sanha's purpose this time isn't to attack the city. Not here to attack the city. Fu Baoguo was even more bewildered when he heard this. But in the next moment, he understood. Reality told him the answer. The Dongxian soldiers who were gradually approaching the Fortress of Resilience, the first troop to enter the fort, marched in a uniform manner. Each of them held a huge shield in one hand, covering their entire body from head to toe, while the other carried a long ladder held by a few people as they sprinted over. When this troop arrived at the edge of the Fortress of Resilience, their next step was to erect the ladder on the wall and turn to leave without a moment's hesitation. Fu Baoguo was still bewildered by the reality before his eyes. What was going on? The ladder had been erected and they were already at the edge of the fort. Why were they not attacking? Was this another form of cold feet? Release the arrows. As Qiu Jianhan ordered, tens of thousands of arrows were fired from the top of the fort. The arrows were obviously aimed at the soldiers who were erecting the ladders, but the Dongxian troops were already prepared for this. The shields in each of their hands were a few sizes bigger than usual, but the rain of arrows did not cause much damage. There were only a few unlucky fellows who were shot when they lowered the ladders and died under the fort. As the number of rolling logs, boulders, and ladders increased, piling up high, the situation became more and more bizarre. Observing from a close distance, Fu Baoguo realized that the ladders used by Dongxian to attack the fort this time were not ladders, but long ladders. They were placed at the highest point, about 10 feet and a half from the top of the fort. The people on the fort could not do anything to these ladders. Although some of the smarter soldiers had already pulled out the flagpoles and guided them to the bottom of the city wall to pull down some of the long ladders, most of the long ladders were only a few feet long and stopped at the height of the middle of the city wall. Even the flagpoles could not reach them. As the cycle continued, the items that Dongxuan's troops had piled up under the fort wall gradually grew thicker and thicker. At a glance, it looked like a gentle slope. With another order from Qiu Jianhan, 5,000 Yutang steel cavalry charged out of the fort. No matter what, we can't let these things take root under the fort wall. Destroy them all. Seeing that Yutang steel cavalry had moved out, the shadow cavalry on the other side had sent a troop out almost at the same time to intercept them. When the enemies met again, both sides would naturally engage in a massacre. Most of Dongxuan's troops were indifferent to the situation, as if they did not see it. It might even be on the verge of collapse. What Han Sanha is doing is speeding up this process. If the fire can't be stopped, the moment the ice melts completely, it'll be the Fortress of Resilience's doomsday. By then, a single attack will be enough to collapse the flawed areas. Perhaps, more than one area will collapse as well. Therefore, this strategy of freezing the fort is only a countermeasure to quench one's thirst with poison. Han Sanha is still trying his best to hasten the poison's effect, accelerating it as much as he can, Qiu Jianhan said. Do you understand now? Fu Baoguo was pale, no longer as calm and collected as he usually was. This extinguished the fire. Qiu Jianhan sighed. The large amount of water that had been prepared beforehand and countless streams of white water gushed down the top of the wall and into the burning fire. Tens of thousands of people splashed water at the same time, and there were a few inexhaustible wells in the Fortress of Resilience. However, after a period of stalemate, the monstrous fire was quickly suppressed, leaving only black smoke billowing into the air. At the top of the fort, the steam that rose from the clash of heat and cold almost shrouded the entire top of the fort. As the temperature plummeted, the ice that had been melted by the fire began to solidify again. Fu Baoguo looked over and said, scratching his head, yes, as long as we extinguish the fire, everything will return to normal. Qiu Jianhan said faintly, how can it return to normal? Look down there. You have me by your side now, how can you lose your usual composure? As a marshal, the most important thing is to remain unfazed even if the mountain collapses in front of you. Fu Baoguo looked down and saw the long ladders that had yet to be completely burnt, especially the rolling logs and rocks that were piled up under the fort. As far as his eyes could see, they had already risen to a certain height. As the fire was extinguished, cold water was splashed down continuously. Other than the rising white smoke, some of the edges had already begun to freeze. What a huge lump. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.